Welcome to Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
I'm your host, Madeline.
And I'm your co-host, Kenna.
Okay, Kenna, today I have a fun question.
Oh.
To start off the pod.
A fun, air quotes fun.
No, it's actually fun this time. Do you remember the Tank Girl movie from the 90s?
Oh, fuck yeah. I loved that movie. I also, at the store I used to own, we like, for a while, was always getting this, like, really cute Tank Girl merchandise, like these baby doll shirts that were really, really sick.
That's so cool. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen Tank Girl merch.
It's really cool.
I can imagine.
It's like like the stuff we had was like mainly from the comics, but like it was really cool.
So good. Okay, so do you remember the villain of the Tank Girl movie? Not the comics, the movie.
Yeah, wasn't it like the water company?
Yeah, it was. It was the water company. Water and Power, actually, is what the company was called. And the premise of Tank Girl is that Tank Girl, right, lives in a post-apocalyptic world in the year 2033 after a comet has struck Earth. And in the comic books, she's, like, in post-apocalyptic Australia, I think. And she, like, actually drives a tank for work. And she gets into all sorts of misadventures fighting the powers that be. But in the movie specifically, it's about how the Water and Power Company has a monopoly on the water supply, and it's all sorts of evil. And the movie focuses on her fight against this privatized Water and Power Corporation. And do you remember the villain of the movie? He has this device that he stabs in people's backs to kill them, and it sucks all the water out of their body.
Oh, yes.
And then he drinks the glass of water at the end.
It's like Dune.
Yes, it's like Dune.
Where they have the water sweatsuits. So
yes. But it's more gay and slightly bestiality. Because her boyfriend is a kangaroo, and I think we need to talk about that more.
Yeah, but it's like kind of nuanced, because like...
He's like half human kangaroo?
Yeah.
That's true.
He's consenting.
He is consenting, I think. Yes, I think you're right. That might have turned it around for me. But yeah, so this movie, it came out in the year 1995. I was 9 and you were 10. And I remember watching it the year it came out. And truly, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, me viewing it at such a young age probably has a lot to do with my personality today. Because Tank Girl was basically like a slutty bisexual freak who never walked away from any fights. And I feel like I really took that on as my personality as I got older. But a thing I remember thinking about was like, oh, this is definitely science fiction. Like, can you imagine a world where a company owns water? Which was just really naive of me, right? In my 9-year-old brain, I was like, that's not possible. But obviously, water privatization was already a thing, and it had been happening in the United States where I live since, like, the United States existed.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm from Colorado, so water rights are a huge deal. Like, a huge deal. Like, I think South Park recently did an episode about it, but water rights are a huge deal in Colorado. So.
Here in California, too.
Yeah.
Where we both grew up. In the West.
Yeah, so I realized, like, that was probably, like, when I saw the movie, I think I was older. I think I was, like, a teenager. Like, I want to say I was, like, maybe, like, 14, 15, maybe even, like, 16 when I saw this movie. So I was just like, oh, yeah, of course. Like, don't we already have something like that? Like, in my brain, I was just, like, already, like, yeah. Like.
Yes. Well, today's episode is inspired by a request from somebody on our Patreon, Jet Unger Hicks, who requested this topic, and I thought it would be a good episode to do today, all about water.
Nice.
Yeah. So, Kenna, if I remember right, you drink tap water, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes, okay, lately I haven't been because I think there's something up with my sink. But normally I'm fine drinking tap water.
Yeah, I thought I remembered that you and I are both tap water drinkers, which is kind of unique.
In California, people are like, ugh.
Yeah, it really freaks people out. It creeps them out a little bit.
Yeah, and like normally I do. It's just like I think that there's something up with my actual faucet right now, and because the water lately has been tasting like ramen noodle water to me.
What?
And I think it might be just in my head a little bit, but
ramen noodle water. I feel like you should get that looked at.
Check that out. But I keep forgetting to call my landlord.
This is funny. So like My boyfriend once did one of the tests on our water in our house because he's like super repulsed by the fact that I drink tap water. But I just tell him like all water tastes disgusting to me. So like I don't taste the difference between like a good water and a shitty water because it all tastes gross to me anyway.
Oh, really? Like, okay, I was talking about this with one of our coworkers. Like, what is the best water? Like, alkaline. And we were like, we both agreed that the best water, and like normally I would not buy this, but it's like this like $6 water that they do Reiki on.
What? What water is it?
It's called Starfire water.
Oh, I've seen it. I've seen the packaging.
I swear the Reiki works because it's like the best tasting water you've ever tasted.
Maybe you could do Reiki over your sink.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Right? Actually, we know someone who does Reiki.
Oh, that's so much cheaper than buying $6 bottles of water.
You just do it the one time. So, okay, do you know how the water gets to your sink, though? Like, do you know where it comes from, how it gets there?
A little bit. I used to work at a plumbing company that did wastewater plants. Like, they built wastewater plants, so I believe there's, like, a source, such like as a reservoir, or, like, I feel like usually it's, like, a reservoir, and then it goes through a wastewater treatment system, then it goes through the city pipes, and then it comes out through your pipes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would guess, but I would guess it starts from like a natural freshwater source, like a river or a lake, and then it gets dammed.
Yeah, or I think in Colorado, like snowfall, and then that goes into the river.
Interesting.
Or that goes into like lakes and rivers.
Yes. Yeah, and then it's filtered and cleaned and purified, and then, like, goes into your local government's water supply somehow, and then it runs through, like, government pipes into each of our houses.
Yeah.
So that's what I would have guessed. And obviously I do know we pay for it, because I have to pay every two months when I get my LADWP bill. That's the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. That's the villain and tank girl. I'm paying them, except it's a public utility here. It's not a private company. And in my head, I think we're paying the government for the water we use, right? Like they're monitoring how much water we use and we're paying it? Or is it like a flat rate? I'm not really sure. I also know there's a Los Angeles Board of Water and Power, and then there's like commissioners that the mayor appoints, so it's definitely a government entity. And then I know also somehow, like, the California water wars probably play into this because we're in Los Angeles, and then there's that movie Chinatown.
I was just thinking about Chinatown.
Right, which is made by the creepy rapist man Roman Polanski. But that's pretty much all I got. Those are all the things come to mind when I'm like, water. That's like, I'm like, creepy man, LADWP, there's pipes that exist, someone built a dam. That's it. That's my whole functioning understanding.
Do we have a dam in Los Angeles?
No, we got an aqueduct.
Oh.
We got an aqueduct. I know that because growing up all the time as a kid, my dad would be like, look at the aqueduct. And sometimes at night, if you look at the aqueduct, it's like bright, pretty colors and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah. It's like a disco aqueduct sometimes. Yeah. So also because I grew up in the California Central Valley, I know farmers always had signs on the outskirts of town that said things like food grows where water flows. And I was always kind of like, yeah, no shit. But I didn't really understand the point of the signs. Like I knew there was some political reason for them. And also, obviously, I know about places like Flint, Michigan, which has the water issues. And I know California is always in a drought, but it's never really had an impact on my life in any tangible way. And I know all of that is somehow related to water policy. But for up until I started researching this episode, I had no clue how all of it came together into one narrative that made sense, that like bound it all. So like, you're from Colorado, it's a different state. Like, what do you know about water policy things there? What are your understandings?
That's just complicated and a fucking nightmare.
Okay, yeah. So basically, that's kind of the same thing that I gathered.
Yeah, and like, my mom was always complaining. She's like, California and Texas gets all our water. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but she was always complaining that all the other states get Colorado water.
I mean, that could be true because California and Texas and New York have the most people.
Yeah, and they're not that far away.
Right, and they're not that far away, exactly. So obviously, like, we're impacted by our access to water every single day, and yet I think, like, most of us don't really think about how we get access to that water. We hear, like, news stories that pop up or, like, people complaining about vague things, but I think, like, the big picture, it's something most of us don't, like, ever consider.
No, because you're just like, water comes out of the sink.
Yeah, water comes out of the sink, right? I take a shower, water comes out of the shower. And I know people are like, conserve the water. And then I'm like, What? Like brushing my teeth for 5 seconds, I need to conserve the water?
Okay, as a kid, because, like, you know, water conservation is a big thing in Colorado, I still do the thing where, like, between brushing my teeth, I turn off the faucet, like, every time. And I don't know if everybody does that, but I'm like, I know that I'm saving water, but I'm also, sometimes I'm like, how much water am I saving versus, like, a golf course?
Versus a golf course, it doesn't even compare. Yeah, like, I remember early on a fight I got into with my boyfriend is he watched me brush my teeth for the first time and I leave the water running and he came up and passive-aggressively turned it off. And then I was like, why'd you turn off the water? And he was like, you're not using it right now. Like, that is so fucked up. Like, don't you care about the planet at all? And I stared at him, and I was so mad. And I was like, you literally drive an SUV that gets 12 miles to the gallon. And he was like, what? And I was like, you literally drive a 2002 Ford Explorer. What is your gas mileage? And he's like, 13. And I was like, cool. I drive a hybrid. Like, we're all killing the planet in different ways. You kill the planet with your car. I'll kill it while I brush my teeth, I guess. You know?
We gotta pick our battles.
We gotta pick our battles. It's gonna be a little different for every one of us. But like you said, it's like we have all these like systemic things and these giant like companies and corporations that are using way more water than we will ever use in our individual lives.
Yeah, and they're like, don't turn on the faucet when you're brushing your teeth.
Right?
Or like, you should brush your teeth in the shower, which I'm like, sometimes I just don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I recently started brushing my teeth in the shower, and I love it. I never thought I'd be that person. It feels good. It feels good. It's convenient. It's a one-stop shop.
Sometimes I don't like the way it feels when, because I like taking, like, really hot showers.
Same.
Like depths of hell hot shower.
As far hot as
but
it can
then
go.
when I brush my teeth, I want the water to be cold, cold, cold.
Yes, okay, so I get this. This is the reason why I didn't do it forever. I was like, why would you brush your teeth with hot water? That's disgusting. But then once I got into it, now I'm never going back. I'm never going back. A hot toothbrush. Hot toothbrush. That would be the name of my next punk band.
It sounds, sorry. It sounds like, oh my gosh. Electroclash band.
It is. Hot toothbrush is totally an electroclash band. Yes. Okay, so the first thing to know about water in the United States, besides the hot toothbrush thing, and Kenna and I, our temperature preferences for showering, is that we don't really have one cohesive national water policy. Instead, it's like this whole mess of policies that apply differently at federal, state, and local levels, meaning every single place here probably has different regulations regarding water. So, like, Fresno's not going to have the same laws as Los Angeles, and California won't have the same laws as Colorado. And experts say this is pretty par for the course as far as most major infrastructure in the United States works, because it's deeply rooted in the idea of U.S. federalism, which is the system of government that exists in the United States based on the Constitution. Under federalism, the federal government has certain powers that are given to it by the Constitution, and then all 50, like, state governments have different powers reserved to them independently. So, to look at how water laws started developing here in the United States, we're going to go way back to the beginning of the United States, like the 1800s-ish, basically.
Oh. I mean, that makes sense.
It makes sense, right? That's where we're starting. So, like, back in the 1800s, water policy was mostly something that was just left to states to figure out on their own. Since the federal government was preoccupied, continuing the history of brutal colonization that Europe had started when white people first ended up here. So in cities, what we saw happening was usually a development of, like, privately owned water systems. So back in 1772, for example, Rhode Island had 2 private water delivery companies in Providence. And in 1849, the Committee on Public Health of the American Medical Association made this finding. They were like, oh my God, the introduction of an abundant supply of water is so intimately connected with the health of a city that the municipal authorities should rank this among the most important of their public duties. The public welfare is too deeply invested in their faithful performance safely to permit them to pass into the hands of incorporated companies, who, however high-minded they might be, look at them as a source of revenue and not as objects of public good. So they come out and they're like, we should not be privatizing this. This is really essential to make sure everyone doesn't get like cholera and die, basically. So then by 1860, over half of the U.S. waterworks were private. And people were pretty split up on how to develop these. They're like, okay, yeah, we're acknowledging that water systems are an integral part of the human health and hygiene thing, but also, like, we don't really want to deal with it. And it was pretty split up around this time. This is 11 years after that medical association made that decree. So New York's water system, for example, was private, but Philadelphia's was public. And as cities on the East Coast entered the 1870s, there was a growing movement towards public ownership of the water supply to try to get those places that had done it privately back into like the public sphere. So by 1890, finally at last, more than 65% of Americans were serviced by a public water system. However, this was like highly in the populated areas of the East Coast in cities where most of the people were, right? So for other states with smaller populations, the government was just like a lot less involved. Remember how they were all preoccupied with extending settler colonialism in the West, right? So the federal government, like the country on the whole, they were basically like, look, other states, do whatever the fuck you want with your water. We don't really care. We're busy. We're murdering native people and stealing their land, so we cannot be bothered with your little water problems. So the states are just like, okay, I guess we'll just figure it out. Meanwhile, though, native people in the U.S. had figured out sustainable ways of integrating water management into their communities for like thousands of years, and they were doing a really good job of it. Even areas like the arid and dry Great Plains of the United States, which the U.S. government called the Great American Desert in the early 1800s, they had water well managed by indigenous tribes like the Lakota and the Blackfeet for thousands of years. So then in 1878, there's geologist John Wesley Powell, who was an early director of the U.S. Geological Survey, said that the Great Plains and the west parts of the U.S., where we're from, Kenna, just struggled with water in general. And he was a white dude who loved capitalism, right? So he was like, you know, obviously these areas that are struggling to get water, the solution to deal with this is to promote land ownership based on watersheds. So rather than just like using a grid-like rectangular lot system that we use today, or just not privately owning the land, he was like, look, the way we're going to make sure people get out here, settle this land, take it away from native people, is by creating these irregularly shaped plots of land that we can sell, so every single plot of land touches water somehow. And Powell was like swimming so much in the sea of capitalism that he couldn't see the evils of privatization of land all around him, right, as he swam through it. So he was just like, yeah. We're developing the land in the United States just in a way that allows everyone to have access to some area of water. So if you want a plot of land, it might be a weird ass shape, but you're going to have like a creek or a stream running through it. And the U.S. government, when he presented this, they were like, no, that's really fucking weird. We're not going to do that. We're just going to ignore the issues of water in the West. And then eventually it'll get to a point where we can't ignore it anymore, and we'll adapt, or we'll just engineer the water scarcity out of existence. But we don't know how yet, and we're not going to think about it right now.
Wow, it seems like that's something that, I don't know, has continued.
Yes.
Where it's just like, this is a problem. We're not going to solve this problem until people just die.
Yeah, we literally have to. We'll wait till we literally have to, and if people die, even that isn't convincing them. They literally have to. Yeah, it's like, what is your
If this
qualifying?
inconveniences us, we are just not going to solve it.
Yes, exactly. So, meanwhile, though, Native Americans in the Great Plains had been employing scientific studies of water in the area for, like, thousands of years. They also had an integrated, like, appreciation for water, which was built into their spiritual and religious practices. Rosalind R. Lapierre writes, I learned from my grandparents, both members of the Blackfeet tribe in Montana, about the sacredness of water. They shared that the Blackfeet believed in 3 separate realms of existence, the earth, sky, and water. The Blackfeet believed that humans and earth beings lived in one realm, sky beings lived in another realm, and underwater beings lived in yet another realm. The Blackfeet viewed all 3 worlds as sacred because within them lived the divine. The water world, in particular, was held in special regard. The Blackfeet believed that in addition to the divine beings about which they learned from their stories, there were divine animals, such as the beaver. The divine beaver, who could talk to humans, taught the Blackfeet their most important religious ceremony. The Blackfeet needed this ceremony to reaffirm their relationships with the 3 separate realms of reality. The divine water beings also instructed the Blackfeet to protect their home, the water world. The Blackfeet could not kill or eat anything living in the water. They also could not disturb or pollute water. The Blackfeet viewed water as a distinct place, a sacred place. It was the home of the divine beings and divine animals who taught the Blackfeet religious rituals and moral restrictions on human behavior. So I really like that. Native American tribes, like the Blackfeet, were always paying close attention to how they interacted with water. Obviously, like, every kind of, like, nation or tribe did things differently, but they all kind of shared this connection to the land that they were on. And the beaver, in particular, with the Blackfeet tribe, was super important because beavers built dams on creeks and rivers that helped create pools and ponds of fresh, clean water. And once, like, a pond of fresh, clean water popped up somewhere, because a beaver built a dam, the ponds would allow for plant life to grow and wildlife to flourish all around it, creating an oasis in like the dry, arid desert. So indigenous people worked with nature rather than against it, and they saw that like these pools and ponds that the beaver dams created benefited them as well. They could allow beavers to just build natural dams, and then they could use those ponds that resulted for their water supply and food supplies. They brought other animals that they were able to hunt. And also, since plants then started growing around the ponds, they had better access to food and medicine that they could derive from the plants. But you know, white settler colonialists were not that smart, and they were motivated by ridiculous things like acquisition and ownership and hoarding of resources and land, so they were not paying attention to these detailed and methodical ways that native people were interacting successfully with water in the regions they called home, that the white people were like, this is a dry, arid desert, it's unlivable, how will anybody survive here? Like, totally just ignoring the fact that people were surviving there fine. So instead, the U.S. government only became concerned with water management in the West when they realized that a federal policy regarding water could actually encourage more white settlement on those regions to help do what they called developing of the area. But what we know was really just the continuation of a violent genocide of Native people and subsequent theft of all their land. So since the U.S. government wanted the land in the West to be settled, big air quotes, by more white people, and white people didn't know how to deal with the issue of water scarcity there, the U.S. government was like, okay, fine, we're going to step in, we're going to help direct water flow to encourage mining and agriculture to make us all a lot of money. And the way they decided to handle it was like this. The federal government was going to be responsible for ensuring the flow of waterways and their usability for economic and domestic purposes, but state and local governments would be responsible for allocating the water. And this is kind of how the whole system of water management we have today in the United States got started. Now, a lot of what ended up happening in the 1800s with the federal U.S. government is that they focused on making major rivers and harbors navigable by boat, which makes sense, right? Because they're like, commerce is what we care about. If we can get boats places, we can trade and we can sell things and we can buy things. Now, Kenna, you know about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, right?
Yes, most famously from Hurricane Katrina.
Same. I didn't know anything about it before Hurricane Katrina. And what do you remember about it?
Basically, I feel like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is just basically the engineering portion of the Army, and they work with things like dams in the case of
Hurricane Katrina, right?
Hurricane Katrina, levees, reservoirs, I believe mainly water, right?
Yeah. So I also heard about them after Hurricane Katrina because their involvement with the levees, right? They said that some levee was strong and then it ended up breaking and everyone was like, you should have known this. But yeah, so the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was established pretty early on in 1802, and it was the primary U.S. government agency responsible for water. So they had this perceived expertise in large-scale water projects like canals and dams, and the U.S. government spent the 1800s trying to build a bunch of this shit in an effort to control the water to encourage economic growth across the country. So major river systems at the time are sometimes referred to as public highways of the country for the 1800s because there were just boats traveling all over the place and they had to be able to get from one place to another. And that's kind of what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was focused on when they were looking at building shit for the waterways. So what we see here is from the jump, controlling water became a tool of colonial violence, obviously against Native people, and a primary contributing factor to the growth of capitalism. Water was needed for agriculture and business, and access to harbors and rivers was needed for the buying and selling of the goods that those businesses created. So in cities, by the late 1800s, water access was developing also along racial lines, kind of the same way that it was developing white people versus Native people in the West. In East in the cities, it was white people were having different experiences with water than, for example, black people were. So from 1896 to 1897, Dr. Dubois, is that how you say it?
I think.
W-E-D, yeah.
Dubois or Dubois?
I always said Dubois, but then in our book club, David pronounced it a different way, and he said that he looked it up and that's how it was pronounced, but I can't remember what he said.
Oh, I can't remember either.
Okay, so I'm going to say Dubois just because that's how I remembered learning it. But he surveyed approximately 9,000 black Philadelphians about their living conditions. And amongst other things, he asked if they had a bathroom or a water closet in their home. And only 14% of them did. So in his findings, Dubois made a clear connection between mortality and sanitation, noting that the highest death rate in the city was located in the ward with the poorest sanitation, which he linked directly to Philadelphia's water access. So he said, for so large and progressive a city, its general system of drainage is very bad. Its water is wretched. And then meanwhile, also around the same time, we had cities developing on the West Coast, Los Angeles, right? And here, Frederick Eaton and William Mulholland, who would be heavily involved in the California water wars, they were friends, and they were working for this privately owned at the time Los Angeles Water Company. And that Mulholland name, that last name should sound pretty familiar to any Angelino who has accidentally ended up at a rich person's house party in the Hollywood Hills one night, like just wondering how you got there and why the fridge is talking to you.
Or if you've seen the David Lynch movie, Mulholland Drive.
I've just done the party, so I've never seen Mulholland Drive. I've just ended up on Mulholland Drive. Like, how did I get invited to this house and what am I doing here? We might have been on Mulholland Drive the time same person, David, came to the party and he broke the fridge. He tried to open it and it just broke, and he looked at me and I was like, we have to leave now. Like, we're just leaving this rich guy's house.
That's what, honestly, not gonna lie, that's probably what I would do. I'm like, they can just get another fridge. Gotta go.
They were very rich. I think he was a movie director or something, yes. So anyway, in 1886, Eaton became city engineer and Mulholland became superintendent at the water company. And then in 1898, Eaton was elected mayor of Los Angeles. So this kind of brings us to 1900. In 1901, Theodore Roosevelt became president, and in 1902, Congress passed this thing called the Reclamation Act. And this is major. So basically what the Reclamation Act said is, look, if you use water, you have to repay the construction costs of things like dams and canals because ultimately you're going to benefit from them. But that will also in turn put more pressure on us to go ahead and build more of this shit for you. So in this era, irrigation projects were called reclamation projects because white people imagined that they were reclaiming unlivable land and making it fit for human use, which is pretty fucking wild, right?
I want to say I'm surprised, but I'm not.
Yeah. So obviously we know that humans were living there quite fine for thousands of years, but it's white supremacy, so they didn't view native people as people, I guess, back then. And they were still on their same settler shit, right? They called it homemaking, like when you would go settle in the West. And they were like, look, if we irrigate the shit out of the land, we'll reclaim it, and then people will want to go out there and do some homemaking and settle and create family farms. So all of a sudden, water is really kind of taking over, like, the efforts of colonization further into the West. This is like they really start sinking everything they can into it in the early 1900s. And Roosevelt, who was president at the time, he liked this. He's like, I've spent some time in the West, and I think advancing these settlement efforts of white people out there is going to be a great idea. But along with the passing of the Reclamation Act came this new responsibility, right? That the U.S. government had to interact now with irrigation across the country and kind of deliver on this promise to the people who were homemaking, big air quotes, out there. So Roosevelt, though, was fine with this. He's like, yeah, we're going to expand everything. Let's build the water infrastructure. And the federal government ramped up their creation of dams, water storage like reservoirs, and water transportation systems. Waterways were developed for multiple uses, from flood control to irrigation to power generation and, still again, transportation. There was also a focus on developing and conserving natural resources, which obviously included water around this time. And on the whole, what we see is the Roosevelt administration making access to water more of their business as the government, but still allowing ultimately local governments and that same power like that existed before to allocate and distribute the water as they saw fit. So that same year, 1902, the United States Reclamation Service was established within the U.S. Geological Survey, and their whole job was to study potential water development projects in each western state with federal lands. And because of the wording of this, it actually excluded Texas for a while because Texas at the time had no federal lands, and they had to be included under like a special provision in 1906, 4 years later. So also that same time in 1902, Frederick Eaton back here in LA was like, hey, we need to convert the water company into city control and get away from it being a private company. And he was successful in this kind of campaign, and that's when it became the Los Angeles Water Department. Right? The humble foundings of the LADWP to which we pay our bills each 60 days.
I think that's... Okay, side note, I hate how it's every 60 days and you cannot use... Like, I cannot use autopay.
Yeah, no, I hate it. It's horrible. The 60-day program, I don't know who decided this was a good idea. It's very annoying.
No, just 30 days and let you do autopay.
Just let me pay the bill every 30 days. No, I agree. It's very confusing. So around this time, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation was looking at building an irrigation system to help out the farmers in Owens Valley, which is out here in California, just outside of LA, right? And this would mean that Los Angeles would not be able to use any of the water from Owens Valley, like, for itself. Owens Valley at the time, it was like this community of farmers, and let's, not get it twisted, they weren't like nice, innocent people. Most of them started showing up in the 1860s through the 1880s because of homesteading acts that allowed white people to claim the land at the expense of driving out the indigenous tribe, which was the Paiutes, like, out of the land. And then they had to fight with the Paiutes to use the water and to get the land, which obviously meant they killed a bunch of native people just to set up these farms in the first place. So, they're not innocent people, but they are people who are living there and are using the water that flows through, like, the Owens River and, like, the Owens Lake that's kind of around there. And Los Angeles, meanwhile, it's starting to grow. I think around this time it had, like, 200,000 people, and Los Angeles was like, fuck, we need access to water. So that sweet, sweet Owens Valley water was looking pretty good to them, right? And then the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is like, no, LA, you can't have this water. We're working on this whole project for Owens Valley to kind of, direct this water to all the farmers there. And, by the mid-1890s, most of the Owens Valley land had been seized up by the white settlers, and they were building irrigation systems there, 200 miles long of canals and ditches. They weren't the best ditches and canals, though. Like, they had shitty drainage, and the soil was oversaturated, and the local lake, Owens Lake, was getting lower and lower every year. So by the early 1900s, part of Owens Valley was already like, okay, fuck this. We're only going to grow fruit, and we're just raising poultry and doing dairy. But some of the people, were there still trying to farm. So this water was still important to some of them. So then Eaton and Mulholland, back in Los Angeles, are like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to fight the Bureau of Reclamation because we are going to get access to that Owens Valley water before they start building all of their stuff to try to make better irrigation systems there. And Eaton and Mulholland started a campaign basically to block the Bureau of Reclamation from irrigating the land. So Eaton had a friend who worked inside the Bureau, Joseph Lippincott, who gave them all this insider info and then would go back and recommend to the Bureau to do these things that seemed like it was helping them, but in actuality, he was actually helping Eaton and Mulholland, like, get the water for LA. And for the service, of course, Eaton paid Lippincott. And this is one of, like, the famous kind of controversies over the water wars. Then in 1905, Eaton started trying to buy a bunch of land up in Owens Valley at, like, really high costs. And locals started to get really suspicious. But his plan was to buy the land as a private citizen and then sell it to the city of Los Angeles at a higher price once he had successfully managed to get all the water routing in the name of LA, So he could be like, no, the Bureau of Reclamation, they're not coming here. I'm just buying up this land here for no reason, though. And then, oops, in the future, if we successfully oust the Bureau of Reclamation and we do our own water management project, this land's going to be really valuable to LA. So on behalf of the Bureau around this time, from 1902 to 1907, these reclamation projects were, like, going really hard in the western states, right? There was about 30 of them happening in total. And by 1907, the reclamation movement was going so ham that the U.S. government was like, okay, you guys need to officially be your own bureau. So they ended up, like, removing them from the geology thing and set them up as a proper branch in the Department of the Interior. And that same year, 1907, Eaton was really on top of his shit, acquiring water rights and getting, doing all his little deeds. I just picture him being, like, sneaky and kind of smarmy, like, ha-ha.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm just thinking of the movie Chinatown.
Yes, okay. And he was even going to Washington a bunch to meet with Teddy Roosevelt's advisors and convince them to give that sweet, sweet Owens Valley river water to Los Angeles instead of these, like, weird few farmers in the Owens Valley that are there. See, LA needed rights of way across federal land to build their aqueduct, which was the end goal. But the locals were like, do not give the right of way on this federal land to LA to build this aqueduct because then that means we don't get the water. And they knew that it would ruin their farms. Eventually, though, Los Angeles won, and then they started, kind of paying farmers to buy out their land. So the next year, in 1908, we see something else happening in regards to water rights, too. We see the U.S. Supreme Court seeing the case of Winter, where white ranchers in Montana were denying the Milk River to downstream Nakota and Anahi people, who were then forced onto the Fort Belknap Reservation. So Winter argued that tribes had forfeited their rights to the surface water when they signed these punitive treaties with the United States, and that reservations only guaranteed land, not water use. And shockingly, the Native people actually won this case, where they were like, no, like, it's not just the reservation. You have to let us use water in this river. And the Supreme Court rejected that guy Winter's argument, and was like, look, the reservations, like federal lands, maintain reserved water rights, and this really allowed indigenous people to assert stronger water claims throughout the U.S. court system, which, you know, a lot of the stuff is just, like, so depressing and horrifying. I was like, oh, look at that one small win. You know, it was kind of nice to read in a sea of otherwise just terrible, terrible genocide.
Ugh.
Yeah. So, additionally, we also have those cities on the East Coast. I sometimes forget the East Coast exists. It's the
We are very West Coast.
We are very West Coast, but they're there. They're there. I can confirm they're there. And back on the East Coast, access to water was starting to get pretty widespread. Like, everybody could pretty much guarantee by this time, you know, 1908, 1909, that they had access to water. But that water wasn't necessarily safe. See, cities were routinely dumping raw sewage into nearby rivers, which caused downstream neighbors to suffer epidemics of waterborne diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid.
Lately, I have been... Okay, so this is a new thing that is happening. Anytime someone mentions sewage, it makes me gag.
Okay, well, I'll try not to mention it too much more, but I can't promise we won't. We might talk about sewage.
There was something that, like, I was watching the other day. I feel like it was, like, something really, like, stupid, like The Addams Family. Or it was some, like, stupid, like, movie from, like, my childhood. And they were drinking... Oh, no, it was What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, it's okay.
And their basement flooded with sewage. And the entire episode, I was like being like, blah, blah, like... You know, like those, like, videos of, like, when someone holds up, like, a cucumber to a cat and they're like,
Yeah, I also just saw the first 2 episodes of the new season with the flooded sewage basement.
I lost it. I was like,
it's so good. Okay, so whatever the case, this all gets us up to, like, 1910-ish. So, we're in the 1910s, and it turns out that a lot of those early Reclamation Bureau water programs, they're not going so well. They're not doing great. They're running into all these issues. There's, like, the land and soil that's included in the projects ends up being unsuitable for irrigation. Land speculation was sometimes resulting in poor settlement patterns. Proposed repayment schedules, because remember they were like, oh, if you're using this, you gotta pay us for it. They couldn't be met by these irrigators who had high land preparation and facility construction costs. And then settlers were really inexperienced in irrigation farming. It's almost like they shouldn't have been there at all, right? And waterlogging of irrigable lands required expensive drainage projects, and projects were built in areas where they could only grow, like, low-value crops. So it was just kind of a mess. It was kind of like a big capitalism settlement fail. And white people were kind of learning that capitalism was inconsistent with a sustainable water policy.
Yeah, it sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, but nobody was willing to admit this yet, right?
Yeah, because it seems like, also, too, like, if you, especially when things are privatized, it's like, well, you're gonna cut corners to increase profits.
Right. So at this time, most of it was federally, like, public. So, like, the government was funding all these things at a public level. But, you know, they were still working with, like, private companies, kind of that free market neoliberal thing, right? So, whatever the case, they just kind of, like, kept on at it, building these, like, bad projects. And the relatively new white settlers in the West were starting to get upset. They were like, none of this shit's working very well. We're really struggling. And by 1913, the city of Los Angeles, meanwhile, had already started diverting water from the Owens River. They were like, no, like, we got our aqueduct. Like, fuck all these farmers. We're diverting the water. We're doing it. And the aqueduct project, overseen by William Mulholland, was, like, officially finished that year. But something really interesting was happening. Those first water flows weren't actually going to Los Angeles, not mostly anyway. They were going to one of my favorite places in California instead, which is the San Fernando Valley.
Nice.
Yeah. See, the valley had an aquifer that could provide free water storage without evaporation. But to access it, LA would have to, like, annex a huge portion of the valley to the city. So Eaton was letting some of his friends in on this thing. Like, we're going to do this. We're going to seize up some San Fernando Valley. And his friends were like, sick, we're going to buy a bunch of land in the valley then so we can, like, be part of LA before it really blows up. And to make sure those purchases were profitable, they became super invested in this whole water deal happening at the time. So some speculate that they were even responsible for large amounts of water from LA reservoirs being dumped into sewers to be wasted in order to create a false drought to make access to the aqueduct water seem more urgent.
For some reason, like, wasting water like that, like, makes my toes curl.
I don't know if it's because I am stupid and from California. I can't really viscerally understand the idea in my core of there not being enough water. Because I'm like, ocean there. Obviously, I know it's not fresh water. I know it's not usable. But I think it's just like some stupid California thing where I'm like, I just look at ocean, water everywhere. Duh.
Yeah, or it's just like, it still comes out of the faucet. So
Yeah.
it's like if, in theory, yes, there's always been like a water crisis, but it's not very tangible. Like,
It's easy to ignore.
It's
easy to ignore, for sure. So once this aqueduct was done, those San Fernando Valley investors, they needed so much water from Owens Valley that it basically dried out Owens Valley. And there were still some farmers who were hanging out there trying to do their best not to sell their land to LA. But outside of Los Angeles in 1914, meanwhile, the U.S. Public Health Service was adopting and enforcing drinking water standards for the first time. Because remember how on the East Coast, they were like, yeah, everybody's got water. And it's like, yeah, you got cholera water. Nobody wants cholera water. So the United States government was like, oh, shit, we should probably start to, like, regulate this. And their objective was to protect interstate travelers and to contain the spread of disease. So by 1915, the use of chlorine to treat water had started to be pretty common across the United States, and that actually did result in a significant drop in waterborne diseases. So this brings us to the 1920s. And in 1923, the U.S. Reclamation Service was renamed the Bureau of Reclamation. They're their own bureau now. And people were growing more and more uneasy about their access to water in the West. So even while the Bureau's getting bigger, patting themselves on the back, people in the West are like, this isn't working very well. By 1923, so much water was being diverted from Owens Valley to Los Angeles that agriculture had become fully impossible, and farmers were starting to try to destroy the aqueduct. And eventually they blew part of it up with dynamite to let water return to the Owens River. That same year that the farmers took to the duct, 1924, this Fact Finders Act came about, which was spotlighting some of the reclamation issues that had been occurring with water in general. And this act was supposed to resolve some of these issues, like the practical issues of them just, like, not being very good at it, and, like, the political issues of how it was interfering with, like, Native people and also farmers. But, you know, it didn't do such a great job, as we'll later see. Meanwhile, this year, 1924, was also the year that Owens Lake dried up completely, ran through it, used all the water, gone.
Wow.
Yeah, and outside of California in 1924, water sanitation was still an ongoing issue. So that year, more than 88% of the population in cities with more than 100,000 people, they continued to pipe untreated wastewater into water bodies, contaminating water supplies. 88%!
Oh.
By 1928, Los Angeles owned 90% of the water in Owens Valley, and agriculture in the region was officially done, like we said. But also, the local bank in Owens Valley around that time collapsed due to sketchy practices by the owners, yay capitalism, who were like brothers. And people there were just so financially ruined and so tired of fighting for something that wasn't even working that they just kind of gave up. And that's how LA got the water.
Whoa.
That we drink today.
Sketchy.
Yeah, sketchy.
I mean, it really is like a drama. Like, I understand now, like, I keep thinking about, again, Chinatown or like Roger Rabbit, where there's like all this intrigue with the government and like private investors, like, who are like going underneath everybody's noses and buying. It's like, it's dramatic.
It's super dramatic. So that same year, in 1928, Congress also authorized the construction of Hoover Dam.
Which Beavis and Butthead blew up in Beavis and Butthead Do America.
Yeah, that was great. They got on the bus. They took the bus. That's American history.
Important part of American history is when Beavis and Butthead blow up the Hoover Dam.
They did America too hard.
Well, they didn't blow it up. They broke it.
Yes. So in 1928, they weren't calling it the Hoover Dam. They called it the Boulder Canyon Project. But this was the first time that money went to reclamation efforts from, like, the general funds of the U.S. So that dam was important. The U.S. was like, we need that. And this was pretty major because even at the time, people were like, I don't know if this should be a government thing. Maybe we should go back to water all being managed by private companies. We're really loving the free market of the capitalist neoliberal nightmare we're creating. Well, we don't know. How involved should the government be in our water? But in the end, the government won the damn thing, and they were put in charge of this project, and they were like, yeah, we're using the government money for it.
They won the damn project.
They won the damn project.
Wait, have you been to the Hoover Dam?
Yeah, I've been a lot.
It's like it's so cool to go there.
I know, it's really big.
It's so huge. Also, as someone who is terrified of heights, it's also like, it's scary, but like it's exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty cool to look at. Yeah. So by the 1930s now, the water requirements for Los Angeles are like just getting bigger. You know, people really like coming here, and it grows, and next thing you know, LADWP, we're up to the D in there, it's their LA Department of Water and Power, they are like, we need more water. So they start buying water rights in the Mono Basin, which is like one basin to the north of Owens Valley. And they're like, we're extending the aqueduct, we're running it up to Mono Basin. And this isn't a small task. They had to like tunnel through Mono craters, which I read are an active volcanic field, but I didn't know that.
Wait, what?
Yeah. And also in the 1930s, while this is going on in California, something else was happening with water in the rest of the western region of the U.S. Do you know what it is?
No.
Dust Bowl.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you ever read The Grapes of Wrath?
No, I missed that one. Somehow, everyone else in my high school had to read it, and somehow I managed to get out of it.
Amazing. It's a very boring book. I had to read it in high school, and it's about the Dust Bowl. I mean, it's interesting. And it was written the year before the Dust Bowl actually ended. So when it was written, it was just kind of like, will it ever be okay again? We don't know. And, you know, The Grapes of Wrath was all about this shit. So the Dust Bowl basically was a nickname they gave the southern plains of the United States, which endured this like severe dust storm epidemic during a really dry period in the 1930s. So from Texas up to Nebraska, high winds brought this dust sweeping across the land, and people and livestock and crops were all killed by it. And this is right after the Great Depression hit, right? So already people were not doing super great. And what ended up happening is a lot of people left their homes, farmers mostly, because they weren't able to farm or live there anymore, and started traveling the country in search of better work and better living conditions. So remember in the late 1800s when the U.S. government was just trying to get white people to settle the western half of the country? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it turns out what happened is that a bunch of really inexperienced people who didn't know how to work with the land at all showed up to become farmers in the Great Plains.
Yeah, sounds like a great plan.
Right. And these early farmers, air quotes, the only thing they knew was this old like folktale superstition, and this is what they used to control all their farming. And that kind of superstition was just the phrase, rain follows the plow. So people literally thought plowing land would lead to more rainfall. So they were like, look, if we get people out here farming, plowing the land, it will permanently alter the climate of this region to make it more sustainable for life in the future.
Sounds scientific.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is scientists, some of them actually got on board with this. And it was all wrapped up in this idea, this like super racist, genocidal idea of manifest destiny, which was like, look, you, white Americans, you have a sacred duty to expand west. Never mind all these people who are already living their lives here before we showed up. So all of these people with no farming experience, they were like, yeah, we'll do that. That's our duty. And they got there, and what ended up happening is that they lucked out with a few like inordinately rainy years. And they were like, look, we don't need irrigation. This is going to be great. We plowed the land, the rain came. So it kind of like fed into their superstitious delusions. So farmers there had been growing wheat pretty well. But during the Great Depression, wheat prices dropped. So farmers were like, oh no, we're not going to make as much money, right? So then they were like, let's rip up some more of this grassland and we'll farm something else too in order to get more bang for our buck. Because that's how the free market works apparently. But then in 1930, a drought came and boom, all the crops began to fail. The farmland was over-plowed and all of that deep-rooted prairie grass that had been holding the soil there, it was all gone. They ripped it up so they could keep farming more stuff because the wheat wasn't getting enough money. And all that ended up happening is the top like soil of all of the land there became dried out dirt that started blowing all over the place because there weren't the prairie grass roots holding it in place. And that created these massive drought-induced dust storms. So all throughout the 1930s, the West was dealing with this dust bowl, which was a combination of a natural drought and man-made poor farming practices and irrigation. And by 1934, 35 million acres of formerly cultivated farmland was utterly useless for farming. and another 125 million acres, which is like 3/4 the size of Texas, was losing its topsoil and going that direction too.
Wow.
Yeah. And these dust storms blowing all this wind around, they weren't like super minor. Like when I think of it, I'm like, yeah, I've seen dust blowing in the wind. No, we've never seen anything like this probably in our lives. People got dust pneumonia, they had chest pain, they had trouble breathing. People died from that pneumonia. They also died from starvation and other conditions. And on May 11th, 1934, a dust storm blew all the way to the East Coast, 2,000 miles, and it decreased visibility to the point that you couldn't see the Statue of Liberty or the U.S. Capitol.
Whoa.
Yeah, but coming from, like, Nebraska, though.
That's wild.
Yeah, and the worst storm happened on April 14th, 1935, which the media, they called this Black Sunday. And basically what happened is a wall of dirt, like 3 million tons of topsoil, blew from Oklahoma, spreading eastwards, covering, like, the whole land.
Whoa.
Yeah, so all of these, like, people from these Dust Bowl states, which were Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma, they needed somewhere new to live, right? They couldn't live here. The land wasn't sustainable for them. Everything was bad. So they packed all their stuff up and they started moving out west. And this is roughly 2.5 million people in total leaving. So from 1935 to 1940, 250,000 people from Oklahoma alone moved out to California and settled mostly in the place that I'm from, the San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah, that's like that song Okie from Muskogee.
Is it Woody Guthrie?
No, I think it's oh my god, I want to say Hank Williams?
Oh.
I don't know who it was. I can't remember. I totally have this wrong, but I was hearing something on NPR and he was like, "Yeah, that's what happened to my parents. They moved to California from Oklahoma and they called us Okies." So I was like,
It might have been Woody Guthrie.
Really?
Yeah. So, like, basically what happened is when all the Okies came out here, Californians were not nice to them. Like, we were mean. We called them Okies. We discriminated against them pretty aggressively. Most of them had to live in shanty towns and tents alongside irrigation ditches. Most of them earned pitiful wages for menial labor. And famed communist Woody Guthrie wrote a whole album about this called Dust Bowl Ballads.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was all about how Californians treated the Okies, because he and his family, they were Okies who had to leave the state during the Dust Bowl seeking survival.
Huh.
And it wasn't until 1939 that rainfall came to the region again and the Dust Bowl finally came to a close. So meanwhile, while all this is going on, in 1938 in California, that place I'm from, the Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, it was experiencing a new project called the Central Valley Project, which was a network of dams, reservoirs, canals, and hydroelectric power plants stretching 400 miles throughout Central California, which indigenous people were like, hey, this is really fucked up. First of all, it's impacting our access to the water. But second of all, it's also damaging, like, the entire local ecology here and, like, fucking up the environment and nature in a really, like, bad way. And the Central Valley of California, it's one of the biggest agricultural output regions of the U.S. today. And there's this one paper called Moving the Rain, Settler Colonialism in the Capitalist State and the Hydrologic Rise in California's Central Valley. And they kind of explained this really well. They said, the pursuit of reliable and convenient water supplies to support capitalist agriculture has driven dramatic transformations across California's landscapes. Wetlands and semi-arid lands were enclosed, cleared, drained, irrigated, and conscripted into circuits of agricultural production under the banner of reclamation. However, a combination of drought, in which the demand for water exceeded available supplies during dry years, and groundwater overdraft eventually limited the expansion of agriculture in the southern Central Valley and threatened the success of reclamation. In order to salvage drought-threatened lands, the state intervened to construct the Central Valley Project, a massive network of water infrastructure intended to provide reliable and subsidized irrigation flows for agriculture. But ever since this was first proposed in the 1930s, indigenous native communities were like, we do not support this. This is fucking up everything. And they were harmed in a lot of ways by these efforts, including in the resulting decimation of the Central Valley salmon population. So this kind of brings us to the 1940s. Basically, California has a fuck ton more people because of the Dust Bowl and other reasons. The Central Valley is suffering from the intersection of capitalism and settler colonialism dictating water supply for industrial farming. And in 1941, Los Angeles isn't even getting enough water from the aqueduct to sustain its population. So it turns to Mono Lake north of Owens Valley, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're getting some of that water too. The aqueduct is extended, but as water is diverted, the lake's natural ecosystem starts getting destroyed. Migrating birds are being threatened, the water becomes more saline and alkaline, and it threatens the brine shrimp populations, and falling water levels even started to expose land bridges to these small islands where like birds had gone for however many years, right, to like lay their eggs in peace and let their babies be born. But since there's like a land bridge now, predators are just walking over and eating all of these like rare birds' eggs. Basically, this whole fucking nightmare is happening. And the main emphasis for dealing with water conservation is still operating off of the goal of just navigation and irrigation. So the federal government was not really stepping in to deal with this too much, with the exception of things like the 1948 Federal Water Pollution Control Act, which was just like a minor effort to try to control water pollution. And by the 1950s, the U.S. was facing another issue, which was deteriorating water quality, especially in the industrial region of the Northeast. So by the 1960s, people were looking around at all this and they're like, dang, this looks pretty fucked up. And this new environmental movement was starting to pick up steam, right? We got like the hippie movement coming out. People are talking about nature. You know, we're destroying all of these natural ecologies in order to just pump water to fuel capitalism. And this is really where we see this new phase of water policy start to emerge, with a goal of protecting the environment too. And with this came the greatest expansion of federal authority in regards to water that the country had ever seen. Now, arrangements had to be made between federal and state governments, where the federal government set like levels of acceptability in water policy, but then the states had to meet those demands. And soon we saw people beginning to oppose water development projects altogether. By the end of the 1960s, 69% of the dams that the United States still uses today had already been built, which is wild because that means they're currently reaching the end of their useful lifespan.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because we like entered this era basically where the policy was just like, let's not keep building things and destroying the planet. So the 1970s then saw this continuation of regulation regarding water policy and water safety. In 1972, we saw the Clean Water Act, which expanded the federal government's authority to cover water quality explicitly via like new federal agencies like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which now was tasked with reducing pollution and improving uses of water for wildlife and fish and recreation, and expanding on that 1948 act that attempted to tackle pollution unsuccessfully before. Under the Clean Water Act, the EPA has implemented pollution control programs like setting wastewater standards and developing national water criteria for pollutants in surface waters. But these are all just recommendations. Ultimately, it's up to states to actually enforce them. And the actual powers in the Clean Water Act, it has it to like make it illegal to pollute navigable waters unless a permit is obtained. And there's a whole Office of Water that has to ensure drinking water is safe, as well as maintaining oceans, watersheds, and their ecosystems to protect human health, support economic and recreational activities, and provide a healthy habitat for wildlife. But there's just not a lot of enforcement. So now in this era, when we look at the pollutants they were mostly concerned with, it's the 1970s, it's a lot of heavy metals, and not the fun kind, right? Petrochemicals, toxic chemicals, bacteria, again from sewage systems, sorry, Kenna.
No.
We can't get rid of it. It's the 1970s. It should be gone by now. But in particular, industrial pollutants inspired the passing of the 1972 Clean Water Act. And in that regard, the act was kind of a success because since the 1970s, we have seen industrial pollution of water reduce in a pretty major way, even if they weren't able to enforce it enough to get rid of all of it. So kind of inspired by, these movements, in 1974, Congress also passed the Safe Drinking Water Act to regulate the country's public drinking water supply. And if you're anything like me, around this time you're wondering why this didn't kick in to fix the situation with Flint, Michigan's water supply. But the fact that these acts still have to work alongside states and existing water systems to enforce these things kind of explains why we see things happening with our water supply that technically should not be happening. And 2 years after that, in 1976, a reclamation project called the Teton Dam. Have you heard of this? Mm-mm. It's Teton. Teton Dam? Teton Dam? Teton Dam. Yeah, so this dam that the Reclamation Bureau made, it failed as they tried to fill it with water for the first time. So this was really demoralizing, right? And this was combined with the growing environmental concerns about what doing all of this water management was really doing to the land. And President Jimmy Carter was in office. He had a disdain for water projects. And this was a really major turning point, basically, in water policy in the U.S. Meanwhile, Los Angeles was still struggling with water in the 1970s. In 1970, LADWP completed a second aqueduct, and in 1972, they began to divert more surface water and pumped groundwater at the rate of several 100,000 acre feet a year, which I don't know what that means. It's several cubic meters per second, and I also don't know what that means, but it sounds big. It sounds like a lot of water.
Sounds like a lot of math, too.
Yeah. It's a lot. There's a shit ton of water getting moved around. And the LADWP, they kind of fucked up, right? Because they never submitted an environmental impact report for any of this. So Inyo County sued the city of LA under the terms of this, like, California Environmental Quality Act. They were like, hey, you never did an environmental impact report on this. What is this doing to the land? So then the LADWP in 1976 and 1979 were like, here's one. We made it. But they were like kind of shitty and didn't do a good job. And the courts were like, we can't accept this. This isn't doing anything. Like, you're not actually assessing the environmental impact. But this whole time that they're trying to figure it out through the 70s, LA is just still doing the water pumping. They're like, yeah, we'll keep pumping it. You guys will figure it out in the courts. And meanwhile, in 1974, this guy, David Gaines, starts studying the biology of Mono Lake. Remember, where they took a bunch of water, including all of the dangers to the ecosystem caused by this water diversion. Like, this is the same lake, remember, where, like, the land bridge was exposed and the birds' eggs were getting eaten. And the Mono Lake Committee that developed from his research, they formed in 1978. And in 1979, they sued the LADWP. They were arguing that navigable bodies of water had to be managed for the benefit of all people, and that's not what was happening here. In addition, in the late 1970s, water settlements became the standard legal political mechanism through which indigenous nations gained any right to access Western waters. So the Supreme Court ruled in 1971 that the 1952 McCarran Amendment, which waived U.S. sovereignty immunity in the case of water rights adjudication. I got it. That was hard. Also applied to water rights litigation between tribes and the states. So state courts were made the venue of litigation, despite the fact that they are less supportive of indigenous authorities. And tribes started competing with state governments for control over the same resources, including water. Consequently, tribal governments felt pressure to settle their water claims instead of risking what little rights they might get through litigation. And water settlements became among the last enclosures of indigenous resources on the continent in the 70s. So now we're in the year 1980. And what we see is, like, water chaos, right? We got, like, native people trying to figure out if they have rights to use the water. We've got people suing the city of LA for what their water use is doing to the environment. We got the federal government coming in and being like, damn, you guys are fucking up a lot of shit. We got to pass some laws, but we don't really have the authority to enforce them. Could you please just kind of do that? And the country is trying to pass all these laws to fix problems caused by reclamation water diversion projects. Some are working better than others. But still local ecosystems are getting destroyed one way or another. And people are really skeptical of further water projects in general. They're like, what did we really get out of this? And this means that the period of construction for things like dams and ditches, it's pretty over by the 1980s. Hydroelectric power was expanding in the West, but dams were seen as destructive. And that's a really interesting consideration for how we view clean energy even today. And the National Environmental Policy Act formalized a federal policy meaning that environmental impacts had to be assessed for future government projects. And this increased public involvement and concerns with the environmental quality that challenged federal water policy on the whole. So regional planning bodies started to get more power, they got more popular at the time, and they primarily organized around river basins. And we really saw the federal government sharing power over water policy with all of these local agencies that popped up. So by the late 1980s, there was a new emphasis on collaborative and voluntary approaches to things like water quality. And this is really interesting because clearly the federal government wasn't doing such an awesome job with water management, but this kind of like Reagan era of liberalization and decentralization saw things potentially getting even worse. The federal government now had like no budget for the environment of any kind. It was basically all just military spending, and federally led infrastructure projects started to decrease. The federal government also withdrew from regional river basin planning, and states started to create their own water policies that were still supposed to meet federal water quality standards. So they tried to create these like intra-state and federal state compacts and coordinating bodies. And while all this is happening, the Bureau of Reclamation stops creating new water projects and shifts to just management and maintenance of existing ones. So you can see, you're like, oh, this new stuff's happening. It seems really not streamlined, let's say. It's not streamlined. And in 1987, the Clean Water Act got an amendment, and this thing comes out called the 319 Program, which is named after a section of the act. And this offers planning and implementation grants to watershed-based organizations focused on addressing runoff from urban areas, roadways, agricultural fields, and other sources. And Congress isn't regulating groups like farmers from runoff pollution unless they're like super huge and have a bunch of animals in a confined space. So now, decreasing pollution means relying mostly on just voluntary efforts by individual people because they don't have the authority to like really pass laws managing it. And this is obviously a challenge in a system of capitalism where profit is held as king above all else. So the government starts being like, look guys, if you didn't pollute, that would be cool, and we can maybe give you like a little financial assistance and like technical assistance if you could like maybe please stop polluting. And as you can imagine, it's not a great system. It's not working so well.
Hey guys, like the vibes are off.
Yeah, you vibe check the farmers. You're polluting, please.
Like there's no consequences, you know, but yeah, just don't. Maybe I don't know.
If you wanted, yeah. But also, you exist in a system of capitalism where your only incentive in things is profits,
and you have to make money because like there's no safety net. So good luck with everything.
Yeah, exactly. So the EPA has these programs coming out, like the Conservation Reserve Program and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And they also have these education programs aimed at like educating farmers and landowners and urban residents about water quality, the impact of various behaviors and methods for reducing pollution. But, you know, it kind of just sounds to me like the complaints people have about the government, where you're like, these seem like a lot of useless small programs that aren't actually doing much to address the issue. It's like optics. It's like, look, we made a committee to tell you about the ways we could potentially maybe address the problem.
It always reminds me if you watch The Good Place where they're like, we're going to make a committee to form another committee.
Yes.
To form another committee, and we'll meet back in 500 years.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's happening here. So as we enter the 90s, we enter this thing called the watershed approach, which is gaining popularity as a way to like deal with water. And basically, it's like this holistic approach dealing with it. The EPA is like, look, the watershed approach is a coordinating framework for environmental management that focuses public and private sector efforts to address the highest priority problems within hydrologically defined geographic areas, taking into consideration both ground and surface water flow. And so what they're saying here is like, the areas draining into particular water bodies, that's just as important as the water body itself. The groundwater is just as important as the surface water. So they're like, look, if we want to control the quality of water in a river, for example, we need to look at all of the sites draining into the river. And that means that necessarily, because rivers don't understand like geopolitical boundaries, water management is going to go across state lines and require like cross-agency and cross-border collaboration. And this all sounds great, but logistically it creates a lot of problems when you consider how greatly decentralized water management like became the status quo in the US, especially under Reagan with minimal funding. The intentions are good. It is a more holistic approach to managing water, but it's a logistical nightmare. And while this is happening, federal policy is also moving away from economic and utilitarian policies regarding water and more into environmental and water conservation efforts in the 1990s. There's the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which encouraged states to tackle water quality and conservation on their own, and the 1999 Water Resources Development Act that focused on local environmental impact. And states increasingly are put in charge of implementing smaller-scale flood control, pollution control, and water conservation measures. By the early 90s, federal water reclamation projects authorized in the 1960s were like all coming to a close, and the Bureau of Reclamation announced that the arid West essentially has been reclaimed. The major rivers have been harnessed and facilities are in place or are being completed to meet the most pressing current water demands and those of the immediate future. And they all patted themselves on the back and they shifted focus to maintaining existing facilities. Now, in the time period, Reclamation was operating 180 projects in the 17 westernmost states, and the total reclamation investment for completed project facilities in September of 1992 was like $11 billion. And reclamation projects provided water to around a third of the population of the American West. And around 5% of the land area of the West was irrigated by the 90s, and reclamation project waters provided water to around 1/5 of that land of the West as well. And this kills me because essentially it took over 100 years for white American settlers to come up with a shittier system to sustain human life in the American West than the system Native people already had that was put in place that was working way better for thousands of years.
Sounds par for the course.
Yes, that's the American way of life, right? And then they patted themselves on the back and they're like, look what we've done. And it's just like destruction everywhere.
Or it just doesn't make like a lot of sense.
Yeah, all the salmon are dead and people are like, what the fuck did you do? Meanwhile, between 1993 to 2003, the number of publicly owned water systems in the U.S. that came under the control of private companies increased by nearly 300%. So this kind of gets us up to the 2000s around where we are today. And what we have now is this really complicated water management system with federal nationwide components and smaller local and state components and Congress and federal agencies and smaller organizations all theoretically working together to ensure water quality across the U.S. Even the Department of Commerce and the Department of Defense have minor roles in managing or regulating water resources in the United States. We have military water, apparently. And the end result is a bit chaotic.
I was going to say, this sounds so complex and complicated and just kind of like a fucking mess.
Yeah, I think that's about what I took away from it at this point, too. There are more than 40 congressional committees and subcommittees alone dealing with water policy. And a lot of them overlap, have fragmentation. And if you add on to that the fact that 12% of Americans now get their water from private companies, you have this whole new issue to contend with, which is just like, what are those companies doing? And in 2015, private companies bought 48 water and sewage utilities, and the next year they bought 53 more. So there's this trend now, like originally when it started out, it was super private, and then everybody was like, this is bad, we need to make this a public utility. And then for a while, it was mostly public utilities. Well, since the 90s, now we're going back to privatizing. So on the whole, water today, it's still a key issue in the United States. Most water, 80%, comes from surface sources like rivers and streams, and 20% comes from underground. And our water infrastructure in the United States today includes like 54,000 drinking water systems with more than 700,000 miles of pipes and 17,000 wastewater treatment plants with an additional 800,000 miles of pipe. And you know those ads that are always telling us to conserve water? Well, it's a bit ridiculous when you look at where water is being used the most.
Oh, tell me the culprits.
Okay, do you want to guess what the number one use of water is?
Military? I don't know. Like...
Oh, maybe. So it's not broken up that way, but the number one use is power generation.
Oh.
49% of water is being used to generate power.
Oh, like dams and such?
Yeah.
Oh.
And then after that, 31% is being used in agriculture to feed both humans and livestock. It's combined.
That makes sense.
And then 11% is for non-domestic public supply.
What does that mean?
I'm not sure. I think it means just like moving water from like one state to another or something like that.
Oh.
4% is industrial. 3% is livestock specifically. And 1% is mining. And 1% is domestic public use.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Mining, wow.
I know. We're using as much water as the miners, which I didn't think there was that much mining going on.
Yeah, I wonder, well, I feel like in Colorado, there's a lot of mining, but I don't know the only thing I know of, because I'm from a town, that mines uranium, so.
Oh! Wow.
Nobody has health problems. Like, I love that I come from a town that has, like, uranium mine, 14 prisons. Like, I feel like there's some other fucked up thing.
I feel like it would be, like, good for, like, a Roswell-style sci-fi TV show from the 90s.
I have always thought this, because I'm like, this is kind of like Gummo meets Twin Peaks.
Yes, there needs to be a show. We need to make a show. When we retire, one day.
Oh my gosh.
If we retire.
I honestly want to make a TV show about the town that I grew up in as a teenager, set in the years that I was a teenager, which would have been the late 90s, early 2000s.
It's like the same timeline we have as Pen 15.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
I think I might be 1 year older.
Yeah, it's definitely like my years were Pen 15 exactly. So you could make like a spooky, creepy version of that.
Basically, yeah, that was my life, but with more metal.
Love it. So this domestic use, do you know what we're using the water for the most in our houses?
I don't know.
It's the toilet.
Really?
Yeah, we're flushing toilets a lot.
Oh, okay.
It's 24% toilet use.
So I guess, like, the hippie thing, mellow, if it's yellow, let it mellow, is, like, correct?
They're actually doing something to contribute to the 24% of the 1%. The 0.24%.
Okay, not to be TMI, but my mom and dad, this was, like, a huge feud between them. Because my dad was if it's yellow, let it mellow. And my mom was absolutely not.
Yeah, I am absolutely not. I don't want to see it. It can go.
I'm with you. It's more of like a gag reflex thing. It's not, but I do understand.
Yeah, I also don't want anybody seeing how dehydrated I am. You don't need to know that.
They get out the chart of the different, like, shades of yellow, and they're like, I'm concerned about your coffee consumption. And you're like, shut the fuck up.
Nobody asked. Yeah. So after toilet, we got 20% shower use. We got 19% faucet. Mm-hmm. So that's our toothbrushing, I guess, and our sink.
And me dishes, I feel like I use a lot of water when I do the dishes.
Oh, yeah. 12% water leaks.
Oh.
Just inefficient use of water, yeah. 17% is if you have a, like, clothing washing. Like washing machine. And 8% is just labeled other. Like outside use, I'm guessing, like watering your plants or whatever.
Oh, interesting. So lawns really are, like, people's lawns aren't as big of a culprit?
I mean, they're probably not great because they're all unnecessary and they destroy, like, local ecology. It definitely wastes water for something we don't need to use. I think that's the thing about lawns. It's, like, totally superfluous. You're like, should we just dump, like, 8% of this away? You know, whatever. And then, like, the things like golf courses, like what you're talking about.
Yes.
It's like, ugh. So I think the lawns, it's one of those things where it, like, adds up on, like, the national scale, you know?
Interesting. So basically we got to get rid of the mines.
We got to get rid of the power.
I know, and I'm like, wait, don't we need that?
Yeah, we need it. We definitely need it. I think the things that are most, like, frivolous is... I don't even know.
I feel like the mines, but maybe we need that stuff. But because I'm just metals. But do we need, like, shit like coal and stuff?
Yeah, we don't need coal mining. We don't need that one. We could probably get rid of coal mining. I mean, honestly, like, not to be that vegan bitch, like, I'm sorry, but it's probably animal agriculture, the water that goes into growing the food for animals to eat so that we can eat the animals.
Yeah.
That's probably the most unnecessary one. I don't judge how other people eat. But sometimes a little bit of the vegan Madeline comes out. She came out right there. I don't care. But if we're counting, I think that's probably that, and, like, things like your front lawn. Those are just things where it's like, you could live a good life without those things, though.
Yeah,
Some people need to eat meat. But.
Yeah, I just want to flush my toilet, man.
Yeah, I just want to flush my toilet. 24% toilet. It was a lot more toilet than I thought, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it's like... maybe I will No, I'm not going to rethink it. I'm just going to not get a lawn, and I'm cutting down on my meat consumption.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the thing too. It's like nobody has to be a perfect anything, right? It's just like being aware of things. Sometimes you're like, oh, I personally don't value that enough to need to do it.
Yeah, I do take really long baths.
I feel like a bath is fine though, because you just fill it up once.
Sometimes I take really long showers too.
I sometimes take really long showers too. That's not great. It's not great.
Maybe I need it for my me time.
We need to stop using the toilet then altogether.
I'm just gonna be really dehydrated.
Yeah. So the thing is, the agriculture use, obviously, like I said, it does include agriculture for livestock to eat too, but most of the water use is through irrigation directly, which is more concentrated in the western U.S. Nearly 85% of irrigation water is used in the 17 most western states served by those Bureau of Reclamation projects. And here's where we really get into the gratuitous stuff. The most agriculture use of water, it's for growing grain, which makes sense. We need grain to live. But it's also for growing cotton.
Really?
Yeah, for clothes.
Interesting.
So the biggest thing is the cotton clothes.
This is the thing sometimes, because I know people think that, like, cotton is, like, the best, like, fabric for clothes. But honestly, some, like, polyester, like, some synthetic materials, like, feel really nice. And they last a lot longer and don't take as much to produce. But that's, like... it's really nuanced and hard to explain.
So while you were gone, I did an episode about fast fashion, and I talked about the same thing. How one of the things that bothers me a lot is the idea of sustainability as it applies to fabrics. Because you can look at something, you can be like, well, cotton is more sustainable to grow. And then you're like, well, kind of. It uses a fuck ton of water. And also anybody who's worked in vintage knows that cotton degrades fastest out of any material. And lots of consumers don't know that. Consumers think like natural fibers last longer.
No, like cotton, anything that has like fur, which we don't really wear nowadays, but like back in the day, people wore more fur.
Even leather will.
Yeah, leather breaks down, like especially different kinds of leather break down really fast. Like older leather jackets usually have like are eaten like somewhere, especially like certain types of leather.
Leather can be well cared for and last a really long time, but yeah, like if you work in vintage like Kenna and I have for so long, you see a lot of leather that's rotting.
Yeah.
It's literally rotting, and t-shirts just fall apart. So yeah, it's like it depends on how you want to go. Like if you go through a lot of clothes, I said this in the video or in the podcast about fast fashion, but it's like if you go through your clothes quickly, yeah, natural fibers like cotton are probably good because they biodegrade really fast if you throw them away. But if you're not the kind of person who throws your clothes away a lot, what you really want is synthetic fiber. Polyester lasts forever.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to use it a lot more. You just might need to repair, like if the thread breaks, you know, and restitch things. But, you know, that's... So I'm glad you said that because I think about that a lot too. And then second to cotton farming and grain would be things like sugar, beets, tree nuts, and then fruits and vegetables.
Huh. Yeah. I like those things.
Me too. So public supply in total is just 12% of total water use, and it's mostly used for commercial and residential purposes, like drinking water and sanitation. And another thing to consider too is that rural families often supply their own groundwater from well systems, so they're, you know, kind of involved in this public supply, but they're not relying on this hardcore irrigation. And where they are publicized, they're usually maintained by states and municipalities in conjunction with private companies. And the main exception to this is in the United States, where we are, since in the Western U.S., public water systems often draw their water from federal wholesale sources, especially the Bureau of Reclamation, though the systems themselves are maintained by local authorities. So in the West, a lot of times we're using that sweet, sweet federal government water.
Oh.
But these water systems, they're in need of upgrades. We've got dams that are in danger of failing soon. We have city pipes that are like leaking bad chemicals. We have distribution that's just a little wacky. In 2011, the EPA assessed the total national infrastructure needs for just drinking water systems at over $380 billion of repairs, mostly needed for upgrades or replacing transmission and distribution systems. And the reality is that because of the increased emphasis on states' rights, there are roughly 50 different water supply policies in the United States, one for each state. And they all tend to fall into like one of these three broad categories. So the first is something called riparian rights. Have you heard this? Riparian? It's R-I-P-A-R-I-A-N. And it's dominant in like eastern states where water is more abundant. And it's an English common law principle that dates back to colonial times where landowners bordering a waterway have the right to use water from that source. And water is just kind of treated as a component of the larger set of rights associated with owning a property. So you don't have to like own the river, but if you're next to the river, you can just own it. Or like you don't have to own the ocean, but if you're next to it, you can just use it. And the second is prior appropriation, which is more common in Western states. And this is something that came about directly from colonization in the West in the 1800s, where water is allocated on like a first come, first served basis. And allocation is treated as a property right that an individual owns. Like your water access can be mortgaged, bought, sold, even taxed. And then the third is like a hybrid system that primarily happens in the Great Plains and Pacific Coast states that combines elements of both riparian and prior appropriation systems. And on top of that, groundwater rights are typically treated differently than surface water rights, which kind of adds to the confusion. And the resulting system ends up being, inefficient and broken for lots of people. Like, to this day, Native people are still struggling to regain control over their water. The Lakota have led hundreds of protests in recent years in a struggle to stop the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline to funnel oil under the Missouri River. Where Native people proclaim that water is life, white capitalist culture proclaims water means business. And that's a direct quote from Metropolitan Policy Program experts Lynn E. Broadus and Joseph Kane. 30 of the country's largest water utilities support up to $52 billion in economic output and 289,000 jobs annually. And the stark difference between these two quotes, right, water is life or water is business, to me, it really highlights the difference between a capitalist and non-capitalist view of life-saving resources. Our current system today is marked by issues like racism, privatization, drought, water imperialism, climate change, and poor quality. Okay, so if you're like me and you're wondering how the fuck we let the Flint, Michigan drinking water crisis reach the level it did, for the past 8 years, right, residents have struggled to have access to usable water after the city stopped buying this like pre-treated water from Lake Huron in April 2014 and instead switched over to the Flint River as its water source in October 2015. A big factor in stuff like that is race. So this report on EPA data shows that race of a population is the strongest correlation to a slow and inefficient enforcement of the federal drinking water laws in the United States. Which, you know, it's not surprising, right? It's always the things. It's always racism and capitalism. But this report, which was co-authored by the Natural Resources Defense Council, Coming Clean, and the Environmental Justice Health Alliance, it proved that ongoing water contamination in majority black neighborhoods like Flint, Michigan, or Newark, New Jersey, it's related to a history of community disinvestment, residential segregation, and discrimination. Christy Pullen-Fedenik, PhD and Director of Science and Data at the Natural Resources Defense Council, says, "As a scientist, I was surprised to find that race had the strongest relationship to the length of time people had to live with drinking water violations. But as a black woman, I was not surprised at all." So according to EPA data from 2016 to 2019, drinking water systems that constantly violated the law for years were 40% more likely to occur in places with higher percentages of residents who were people of color. And even when action was taking place to compel these people to fix their systemic violations, it still took longer for water systems in communities of color to come back into compliance. So the Safe Drinking Water Act found that in addition to race, ethnicity, and language spoken at home also have strong relationships to serious longstanding violations and ineffective enforcement of the nation's drinking water laws. And a lot of this ties to the funding of infrastructure. Aging, underdeveloped, and underfunded water infrastructure contributes to unsafe water conditions, and some dangerous contaminants end up being not regulated at all. Drinking contaminated water is then linked to things like cancer, compromised fertility, developmental effects, serious infection, and more. And it doesn't just happen in major cities. Small systems serving less than 3,000 people, located predominantly in low-income, vulnerable rural populations, those were responsible for more than 80% of all violations found in one study.
Wow.
Yeah, and rural communities and agricultural regions are often exposed to contaminants resulting from, intensive agricultural practices. So in California, where we are, two primary agricultural regions, the San Joaquin Valley, where I'm from, and the Salinas Valley, both are experiencing a documented crisis of nitrate contamination in groundwater resulting from intensive agricultural practice. In addition to nitrate, these communities are also exposed to arsenic in drinking water supplies. My county, in particular, Fresno County, is one of the 3 most heavily impacted areas in regards to nitrate contamination in drinking water in the country. And it's also worth noting that in addition to being rural, these communities are also predominantly Latino.
Yeah, it's always surprising yet not surprising.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, Native American communities face difficulty accessing clean water, often also facing arsenic contamination, a lack of a steady water supply in general. In the Navajo Nation, where more than 300,000 people reside in a territory that stretches across parts of Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona, residents unknowingly drank and played in water that uranium mining, hey, Kenna, had made extremely hazardous. Additionally, there's a cultural element to water management that adversely impacts Native people in the United States. In May of this year, a group of indigenous leaders in California demanded that the state review its water quality plan for the Delta and San Francisco Bay, where fish are suffering. Via petition submitted to the State Water Resources Control Board, Native activists say that the ecological crisis in the Delta had its roots in California's history of violence against Native people, the taking of land from tribes, and structural racism that shaped how the water rights system was established more than a century ago, representing a continuation of California's discriminatory water management history. On top of that, Elaine Labson, who's the health equity director of Little Manila Rising, said people who immigrated to California during the U.S. occupation of the Philippines worked in the Delta building levees and laboring in fields of asparagus, onions, and potatoes, but still didn't gain water rights. She said, from 1913 to 1945, California's racist alien land law prevented Filipinos from owning property, which is a prerequisite for acquiring water rights. Data gathered from June 1st, 2016 to May 31st, 2019 included nearly 200,000 violations of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and this means that nearly 130 million people in the United States got their drinking water from systems that violated federal law during the time period reviewed in the report. Which, don't we only have like 300 million people
I was like, isn't that like 30% of people?
It's almost half, yeah. Obviously, the most popular water crisis is the Flint water crisis, which we mentioned a second ago. But that change in where water in Flint came from way back in 2014, that was done in an effort to cut the budget. Almost immediately following the switch from Lake Huron's clean water to the heavily polluted Flint River, residents began to complain about hair loss, rashes, and strange-looking and tasting tap water. Concerned residents called the city frequently to complain, only to be told that the water was fine. And obviously we know that this is a predominantly black community. The former Flint mayor, Dane Walling, even drank the water live on television to prove that it was okay to drink. No. For months, these residents were encouraged to consume dangerous, deadly water.
I'm like the cat with the cucumber.
Yeah. But the whole time, the residents knew this was not right. They were like, no, Flint pediatrician Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha was the first person to find elevated levels of lead in the blood of children in Flint during the water crisis. A study by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention found that even minimal lead exposure can cause cognitive and behavioral issues, including an increased propensity towards violent behavior. In fact, children with lead poisoning are 7 times more likely to drop out of school and 6 times more likely to become involved in the juvenile justice system than those not exposed to lead. The impact of lead exposure is irreversible. Jolena Friedman documented more than $1,000 in additional annual expenses just from having to buy drinking water from a store because she lived in Flint. To this day, she uses tap water in Flint, which is supposedly fixed, for her showers and to wash dishes, but she still refuses to drink from it or cook with it. This year, she said, "I feel that we are still in the thick of everything. Nothing has really happened." Current Mayor Sheldon Neely said that there's still a lot of progress to be made, both infrastructurally and psychologically in the city. They have a secondary delivery system for water, but are still working to provide better results to residents. And the backup water supply has been coming from the Great Lakes Water Authority, but only recently, 8 years later, did they secure a secondary water source connection with the Genesee County Drain Commission. And criminal and civil cases involving former local and government officials in Flint are still pending. There's criminal charges against former Governor Rick Snyder, Eden Wells, who's the former chief medical executive for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. There's Nick Lyon, former director of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services as well. Darnell Early, former Flint emergency manager. Gerald Ambrose, former Flint emergency manager. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And in keeping with findings that such water quality violations happen most often in community of color, 56% of Flint's population is black. And according to the 2015 census, more than 40% of residents there are living below the federal poverty level. Ugh. So this is obviously a thing like all infrastructure things and environmental racism. It disproportionately affects people of color and poor people. And one of the things we see kind of overlap with this is a thing we touched on, which is like just poor quality of systems and how that relates to people not wanting to spend the money to improve the infrastructure. So while poor quality water is an issue many low-income communities and communities of color face in more dramatic ways, it's also a national issue that kind of faces everyone in the United States one way or another. Our water infrastructure is neglected, with U.S. water systems needing $1 trillion in updates and repairs over the next 20 years, all while funding for water infrastructure has fallen 74% since 1977.
Wow.
Yeah, and as this federal funding falls, regional providers are increasing utility costs to pay for adequate upgrades, they say. Water rates are increasing across the U.S., basically, with some estimates showing that the average monthly residential bill has gone up by 48% since 2010. And relative to other expenses, households have seen the price of water and sewer services soar over the past 2 decades. Compounding the issues of racism, predominantly black neighborhoods in places like Baltimore have also seen liens placed against black homeowners for as little as $350 in unpaid water bills.
Damn, I'm not surprised.
I know, it's so fucked up, right? Nearly 500,000 households lacked complete plumbing in the United States from 2014 to 2018. And many people just will have plumbing, but it's not super adequate. In this one Alabama community, which I know you and I have talked about before because the UN came to take a look at it, where the local government wouldn't pay for the infrastructure to connect homes to proper wastewater disposal lines, so sewage would just bubble up in people's showers and bathtubs and onto people's lawns. I'm sorry, I think this is the last sewage one. But yeah, a 2017 study of county residents there found that 34% of participants suffered from hookworm, which is a parasitic infection contracted by walking barefoot on soil that is, I am so sorry, Kenna, contaminated by fecal matter.
I hate this so much.
And this is where the UN came out to investigate poverty in the United States. Because hookworm is something that shouldn't exist, basically.
Yeah, I love how, like, America acts like it's, like, the hellholes are, like, in different countries, but literally they're, like, these parts of the U.S. are the hellish nightmare on Earth. Like, literally the UN being, like, the worst place on the planet is Skid Row, and then coming to, like, the U.S., which is, like, supposed to be the most prosperous country in the world, and being like, this is also, like, worse than, like, anywhere.
Yeah. Like, Skid Row and Alabama were the two places they looked at, and they were like, both of these places, we haven't seen anything like this. So, meanwhile, there's also a backlog of repairs at many water providers. Like, 88% of Americans believe some type of action is needed to improve the country's water infrastructure, but only 17% of existing utilities are confident that they have enough money to pay for just the costs of existing in the future, not even counting repairs. Which means that the free market is yet again failing to meet our basic needs for survival. Not to mention, major infrastructure is failing too. So 62,000 of the country's 90,000 dams, which is around 70%, those were the ones built before 1970. And 17% pose a potentially high hazard to the economy, environment, and human life if they fall. Oof. And a 2012 report of the American Water Works Association concluded that more than 1 million miles of pipes need repair or placement in the U.S. That's why communities across the nation suffer with 240,000 water main breaks per year. And a major cause of pipe failure is just age. The American Society of Civil Engineers has consistently given the United States a D or D+ grade for water infrastructure.
Yeah, this seems like par for the course with, like, our infrastructure in general.
Right? It's just not that great. And the inability for the government to adequately fund water has now been met somehow with, like, that same neoliberal hellscape solution, which harkens back to Tank Girl, which is to turn yet again to the privatization of water. And as we know, in the U.S., many water supplies were initially privatized, right? But poor results led to a pull away from privatization and instead a move towards public service, only to be rescinded gradually throughout the 1990s through now. The World Bank has predicted that by the year 2025, 2/3 of the world's population will run short of fresh drinking water, meaning that water ownership is now a major thing under capitalism that people perceive as being profitable in the future. But in the end, privatization ends up being bad for consumers. For one thing, customers pay more for water after private companies take over. When residents of Mooresville, Indiana grew frustrated with rate hikes after privatizing their water supply, the city tried to buy the system back from American Water, which is the name of the company, for more than $9 million. And a judge ruled in the city of Mooresville's favor in 2014, but the court-approved price ended up being $20.3 million, which was way more than this town of 10,000 people was able to pay. So today, Mooresville water system is still privately owned. In 2015, Fort Wayne, Indiana finished paying $67 million to take control of water systems in 2 areas served by private companies, most recently by Aqua America. The eminent domain effort lasted 13 years and included 2 separate court cases, a trip to the Indiana Supreme Court, and protracted battles over the price. Missoula, Montana took ownership of his water system away from a private company in June after winning a fight that left the city of 70,000 facing an $88.6 million bill, plus millions of dollars more in expenses. And this is super interesting to me because the city nearest to my grandmother, I think, is Missoula. She lives on the outskirts of Billings, Montana.
Oh.
Yeah, and Montana's a very conservative place, so I would think they would be all about privatization of water. However, over the years, Missoula's water system, which was owned by a regional water company, which was then owned by one of the world's largest private equity funds, the Carlyle Group, and by a subsidiary of Algonquin Power and Utilities, which is a Canadian corporation. The city was arguing that under this private ownership, the system leaked so badly that half of the water flowing through its pipes was just lost, and that during Carlyle's 3-year tenure, Carlyle investors received millions of dollars in dividends paid for by Missoula taxpayers and ratepayers. Rates have increased in many U.S. communities where water has been privatized, disproportionately also affecting low-income families. In Pekin, Illinois, rates increased 204% over the 18 years that Illinois American, a subsidiary of American Water Works Co., ran the water system there. And water companies justify these increases as necessary to offset the cost of upgrading the infrastructure. But what we see is that the infrastructure remains untouched while profits and executive salaries continue to grow. In the year 2000, the American Water Works CEO, who we mentioned a few times in here, the compensation for that position exceeded $2 million a year, and that was over 20 years ago.
Wow.
In the decade following the 1989 privatization of England and Wales water systems, water companies there did not invest in infrastructure, claiming profitability would be compromised. Consumers, however, still saw their rates increase by 102%. During that time, the number of people who had their water shut off also rose by 200% in the region.
Oof.
Then in Nelspruit, South Africa, water rates increased by more than 400% between 1995 and 2000, creating a cholera epidemic because people were forced to drink from the river because they couldn't afford the running water. The average community with privatized water in the U.S. paid 59% more on the whole than those with government-supplied water. In New Jersey, which has more private water than most, private systems charge 79% more. And privatization also leads to issues ensuring quality, like we saw in Flint, Michigan, and Pittsburgh, when private water company Veolia had a contract with both of the cities at the time that led to an increase in lead levels in both water systems. In Walkerton, which is in Ontario, Canada, 7 people died and 2,300 others became ill as a result of an E. coli contamination in the drinking water. A&L Laboratories, the private company contracted to test the water, knew that the water was contaminated. But under regulations intended to encourage privatization, the company was not required to alert government officials about a public health crisis in the making. Moreover, the contamination problem was revealed in a federal government study several years earlier. And additionally, the private lab testing Walkerton's water at the time was not even accredited. So in 1998, Atlanta granted a 20-year contract to a private company to run its municipal water system. Once the company took over, the quality of Atlanta's water suffered. It turned like a rusty brown color, and hundreds of waterworks employees were fired, and city funds were improperly used by the company for outside projects. The contract between the city and the company was amicably dissolved in 2003, and the city returned to public ownership. And this kind of brings up this other thing, too, that can happen in privatization, which is corruption issues. In 1995, Puerto Rico contracted the management of their water authority, which is called PRASA, to the largest water multinational in the world, Vivendi, through a subsidiary now called Compañía de Aguas. 4 years later, the Puerto Rico Comptroller's Office issued a scathing report on the many failures of the arrangement, ranging from problems with the repair and upkeep of aqueducts and sewers to delinquency in submitting required financial reports. And consumer complaints and inquiries were regularly ignored. There were accounts of citizens never receiving water at all, even though they were charged. New Orleans also experienced a privatization scandal in the year 2000 when Aqua Alliance Inc., the parent company of PSG, gave more than $70,000 in bribes to Catherine Moraldo, a member of the New Orleans Water and Sewage Board. In exchange, Moraldo recommended that the city renew its wastewater treatment contract with the company. On top of that, the role of the IMF and the World Bank in water privatization in less than wealthy countries results in a reduction of access to water for the poor. Structural adjustment programs forced upon governments who seek loans from like the IMF and the World Bank, they often include this like stipulation that country, those governments will include water privatization for like as a condition of receiving the money. And as a result, the IMF and World Bank are able to provide these like lucrative and virtually risk-free contracts for multinational water corporations to come into these countries. Bolivia's public water system was recently privatized as a condition for a World Bank loan, and the private water company, Aguas del Tunari, immediately doubled water prices. For thousands of families, their water bill accounted for a fourth of their monthly budgets.
What the fuck?
Yeah, and other families just had their water turned off completely. And hundreds of thousands of Bolivians protested and were met by their government with violence over this. Bechtel, Aguas del Tunari's parent corporation, finally backed out, but it's threatening to sue Bolivia for nearly $40 million in losses. As forecasting says that water will be increasingly harder to access as a resource, private companies like Global Water Corporation and Aqua Route Inc. are rushing to expand their water holdings, both in the form of full ownership and also easements, which are just like rights to limited use of existing waterways. And an agreement between Cadiz Inc. and Metropolitan Water District of California will allow the corporation to sell up to 30,000 acre-feet of water a year to third parties through publicly owned pipes. So according to the National Inventory of Dams, the federal government only owns like 3.7% of the nation's nearly 90,000 dams. And then state and local governments own around 27.3%. That means that the private sector ends up being the biggest owner already, owning around 64.2% of the United States dams. So additionally, our water system today is also plagued by challenges as a result of drought issues yet again. We're told horrific facts, right? Like the Colorado River no longer reaches the sea. But like we were talking about earlier, it's hard to kind of understand what that means for us in our future. Water use did increase throughout the 20th century, peaking in the 1970s and 1980s before declining a bit. But on the whole, water usage increased over 200% between 1950 and the year 2000, driven by but outpacing population growth, which increased just 90% over the same period. There are some wins, right? Like the nation uses less water for irrigation now than we did in the 1970s, despite irrigating more acreage overall. However, federal agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the EPA report low levels of efficiency in water systems in the United States in general compared with other countries. U.S. per capita water consumption is among the highest in the world, amounting to more than twice that of other countries like Germany, Japan, or the United Kingdom. But most of that isn't at the individual use level. It's in the form more of institutional things we rely on, like power or farming or things like cotton to make clothes. So in 2019, the U.S. government announced that the country was running out of water, right? And many regions were seeing their freshwater supply reduced by as much as a third over the next 50 years in this report. According to National Geographic, of all the freshwater basins that channel rain and snow into the rivers from which we draw the water we rely on for everything from drinking and cooking to washing and cleaning, nearly half may be unable to meet consumers' monthly demands by the year 2071. So this will mean serious water shortages for Americans. Shortages won't affect only the regions that we'd expect to be dry. With as many of 96 out of 204 basins in trouble, water shortages would actually impact most of the United States, including the central and southern Great Plains, the Southwest, central Rocky Mountain states, as well as parts of California, the South, and the Midwest. We also see a growing population, especially in the most arid of the U.S. states. More people are coming to places that happen to be hotter and drier, per the federal government's goal 2 centuries back, right? Where they were like, we're going to encourage everybody to move west. And it's like, okay, well, you did it. But now this just places more pressure on the water system that we have out here. In California, we're constantly told that we're in a drought. But again, it's you don't really see the effects of it personally. Still, as of July 14th, 2022, every single region in California is experiencing at least moderate drought. California's 2022 to 2023 budget allocates an additional $2.8 billion to support drought resistance. And California has been seen on the whole as a leader in terms of states fighting to conserve water. The federal government is always California is doing a great job with water conservation, and all of these efforts to control water, and other states need to keep up. And we do have even experimental plans we've been working on for a long time, which is desalinating the ocean. We're always putting money into these efforts to figure out how to make ocean water drinkable.
Does it work?
Well, there are people who know how to do it, but basically they're it's way too expensive and inefficient to be useful, but maybe as technology advances, it'll be worthwhile. And the reality though is that drought is also just kind of a natural part of California's ecology. That's how it's always kind of been here. And even though it is a normal part of our ecology, it is hard to deny the impact that climate change has already had and will continue to have on water resources around the world, not just in California. Everything that normally happened is now getting so exacerbated due to climate change that our natural droughts in California are becoming more and more intense. The less we have rain, it also contributes to things our increased wildfires and more aggressive fires. So according to The Water Problem, which is a new book edited by Pat Mulroy, who's a senior fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program for Climate Adaptation and Environmental Policy at UNLV's Brookings Mountains West, which is a big title. Climate and water cycles are closely tied, and they're going to have a major impact across the U.S. from changes in snowpack, precipitation, flooding, to seasonality of runoff and other water-related events. So basically, it's U.S. water systems and the communities that depend on them are going to start feeling the strain of climate change soon. As the book puts it, climate is a driver of water supply conditions, and these changes can lead to a wide range of potential risks that ripple across economic sectors and communities. So UNICEF even has some data on this, right? And they're look, extreme weather events and changes in water cycle patterns are making it more difficult to access safe drinking water already, especially for vulnerable children. Around 74% of natural disasters between 2001 and 2018 were water-related, including droughts and floods. And the frequency and intensity of these events are expected to increase with climate change. There's also around 450 million children who live in areas of high or extremely high water vulnerability, which means they don't have enough water to meet their everyday needs. There's rising temperatures that can lead to deadly pathogens in freshwater sources, making the water dangerous for people to drink. There's contaminated water that poses a huge threat to children's lives. Water and sanitation-related diseases are one of the leading causes of death in children under 5 years old already. And every day, over 700 children under 5 die from diarrhea linked to inadequate water, sanitation, and hygiene. Climate change exacerbates water stress, areas of extremely limited water resources, leading to increased competition for water and even conflict. And by 2040, almost 1 in 4 children will live in areas of extremely high water stress. So we hear all this, and it's like kind of doomsday, right? But then also it's like hard because you're like, I don't see it.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be like one of those things, like, we're not going to see it until it gets really fucking bad. Like, I think about it with COVID. Like, there was all this, like, preparedness, you know, like, supposedly we were prepared for, like, you know, a viral outbreak of something, but we weren't. Like,
right.
You know, and, like, we're not going to see the effects of how bad it was until people were dying, the supply chains were messed up. Like, I feel like we're not going to see it until it gets really bad, because people think that basically, like, a lot of people think who are, like, you know, middle class or have some sort of privilege where they're like, well, I don't have to worry about it because I can always, like, afford to deal with it. You know, like, I'll just move somewhere, I'll just pay more money, or I'll just, like, I'll be fine.
Right. And then what we're end up, like, left with today is, like, this broken system of water management, but it, like, never really worked that well to begin with, like, since the moment white people set foot on the continent.
Yeah.
So the solution, obviously, to me, is to go back to the system that naturally sustained the most people with the least amount of effort in every geographical location, which means decolonizing water. Like, when white people came to the United States, there were people surviving in the area that's California or Oklahoma or Colorado now. They were able to work within nature and the environment to, like, live off of the land in a way that worked for nature and for people to live. And that seems like the natural way for, like, sustainable water practice.
Yeah, I don't know, like, a lot about water, like, just the logistics of it, but I imagine there's a lot of, like, people who study this, like, like, that is, like, what they went to school for, and I feel like there are probably people out there who, like, this is logistically, like, how you would solve a water problem without, like, having the, like, least amount of impact on a climate while doing most for the most people. But probably it's not getting done because of all these barriers from private companies, lobbyists, I'm guessing landowners who have water rights, who make money off their water rights. Like, to me, it's, like, basically, like, this web of complication that makes it so it's impossible to get done, one of which is this, like, states' rights thing, where it's, like, sometimes on some things you need everyone to, like, come together to be, like, on the same page, because otherwise it's not gonna work.
Right. So that paper that I mentioned earlier, that was called Moving the Rain, it was written by Theo Clare and Kevin Surprise, and one of the things they said that really stood out to me is, like, California's water problems cannot be solved by the same engineering and technical solutions that caused them. And I feel like that could be sad for the entirety of the United States, right? Like, we need different solutions than massive irrigation attempts that pay no honor to the natural topography of the land and history of its people. And we need new solutions that take into account environmental racism, climate change, and intensifying drought cycles. And all these solutions stand in opposition to capitalism, which is what you were just describing, which encourages us to keep buying cotton t-shirts at 2,700 liters of water per pop to make.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like, to me, it does all come back to, like, we need to center Indigenous voices in our water policy in the U.S. who support a human right to water, which isn't tied to market whims or capital interests. In 2003, there was this water forum in Kyoto, Japan. It was the Third World Water Forum. And the Indigenous Peoples Kyoto Water Declaration was published. And I just really love this. So I want to read part of this out loud. This is just, like, part of it. But basically it says, We, the indigenous peoples from all parts of the world assembled here, reaffirm our relationship to Mother Earth and responsibility to future generations to raise our voices in solidarity to speak for the protection of water. We were placed in a sacred manner on this earth, each in our own sacred and traditional lands and territories to care for all creation and to care for water. We recognize, honor, and respect water as sacred and sustains all life. Our traditional knowledge, laws, and ways of life teach us to be responsible in caring for this sacred gift that connects all life. Our relationship with our lands, territories, and water is the fundamental physical, culture, and spiritual basis for our existence. This relationship to our Mother Earth requires us to conserve our fresh waters and oceans for the survival of present and future generations. We assert our role as caretakers with rights and responsibilities to defend and ensure the protection, availability, and purity of water. We stand united to follow and implement our knowledge and traditional laws and exercise our rights of self-determination to preserve water and to preserve life. There's also a section that talks about like the conditions of our waters, which says the ecosystems of the world have been compounding in change and in crisis. In our generation, we see that our waters are being polluted with chemicals, pesticides, sewage, disease, radioactive contamination, and ocean dumping from mining and shipping wastes. We see our waters being depleted or converted into destructive use through the diversion and damming of water systems, mining and mineral extraction, mining of groundwater and aquifer for industrial and commercial purposes, and unsustainable economic, resource, and recreational development, as well as the transformation of excessive amounts of water into energy. In the tropical southern and northern forest regions, deforestation has resulted in soil erosion and thermal contamination of our water. The burning of oil, gas, and coal, known collectively as fossil fuels, is the primary source of human-induced climate change. Climate change, if not halted, will result in increased frequency and severity of storms, floods, droughts, and water shortage. Globally, climate change is worsening desertification. It's polluting and drying up the subterranean water sources and is causing the extinction of precious flora and fauna. Many countries in Africa have been suffering from unprecedented droughts. The most vulnerable communities in climate change are indigenous people and impoverished local communities occupying marginal rural and urban environments. Small island communities are threatened with becoming submerged by rising oceans. We see our waters increasingly governed by imposed economic, foreign, and colonial domination, as well as trade agreements and commercial practices that disconnect us as peoples from the ecosystem. Water is being treated as a commodity and as a property interest that can be bought, sold, and traded in global and domestic market-based systems. These imposed and inhumane practices do not respect that all life is sacred, that water is sacred. When water is disrespected, misused, and poorly managed, we see the life-threatening impacts on all of creation. We know that our right of self-determination and sovereignty, our traditional knowledge, and practices to protect the water are being disregarded, violated, and disrespected. Throughout indigenous territories worldwide, we witness the increasing pollution and scarcity of fresh waters and the lack of access that we and other life forms such as the land, forests, animals, birds, plants, marine life, and air have to our waters, including oceans. In these times of scarcity, we see our governments creating commercial interests in water that lead to inequities in distribution and prevent our access to the life-giving nature of water. Then there's also this section that's like traditional knowledge, which I think is really cool, which I was kind of speaking to earlier. It's like people who have been on this land like understand how to work with the land because they've done it for thousands of years, right? So they say, our traditional practices are dynamically regulated systems. They are based on natural and spiritual laws, ensuring sustainable use through traditional resource conservation. Long-tenured and place-based traditional knowledge of the environment is extremely valuable and has been proven to be valid and effective. Our traditional knowledge developed over the millennia should not be compromised by an over-reliance on relatively recent and narrowly defined Western reductionist scientific methods and standards. We support the implementation of strong measures to allow the full and equal participation of indigenous peoples to share our experiences, knowledge, and concerns. The indiscriminate and narrow application of modern scientific tools and technologies has contributed to the loss and degradation of water. And I just think about this so much because I think about like, you know, imagine you have, okay, here's like a good example for me as a white person to like contextualize this in my own life, because obviously I will never have the firsthand experience of like genocide and like theft of my land by like settler colonialism. But it's like, I used to have a 1969 Carmageddon, and there was a way to get it in reverse, and you had to kind of do this little trick with the clutch to get it in reverse. And it would kind of be like watching somebody come to your house and take your car, and you're like, okay, and then they're trying to get it to reverse, and they're not doing it right, and they're just destroying the transmission as you try, and you're like, okay, I love this car, like, I don't want you to destroy the transmission, like, I'll show you how you get it in reverse, and they're like, step back, idiot, I know what I'm doing, you know? Oof. And that's how it feels to me. It's like, These people have been here and they know how the land works. And every time they try to be like, hey, you shouldn't do this. You're killing all the fucking fish. You're going to need the fish. White people are like, sit down. We know what we're doing. And it's like, well, we don't. We don't know what we're doing. And we're disregarding all of the traditional knowledge that has been there with the people who've existed on this land for generations. And in this, they also came up with a plan of action, which is like, there's literally a plan of action that people who are most familiar with land say we need to do in order to preserve our relationship with water. And there's a lot of points here, you know. One of them is we resolve to sustain our ancestral and historical relationships with and assert our inherent and inalienable rights to our land and waters. We resolve to maintain, strengthen, and support Indigenous peoples' movements, struggles, and campaigns on water, and enhance the role of Indigenous elders, women, and youth to protect water. We seek to establish a working group of Indigenous peoples on water, which will facilitate linkages between Indigenous peoples and provide technical and legal assistance to Indigenous communities who need such support in their struggles for the right to land and water. We will encourage the creation of similar working groups at the local, national, and regional levels. We challenge the dominant paradigm, policies, and programs on water development, which includes, among other things, government ownership of water, construction of large water infrastructures, corporatization, the privatization and commodification of water, the use of water as a tradable commodity, and the liberalization of trade in water services, which do not recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples to water. We call on the government's multilateral organizations, academic institutions, and think tanks to stop promoting and subsidizing the institutionalization and implementation of these anti-people and anti-nature policies and programs. We demand a stop to mining, logging, energy, and tourism projects that drain and pollute our waters and territories. We demand that the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, regional banks like the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank stop the imposition of water privatization or full cost recovery as a condition for new loans and renewal of loans of developing countries. We ask the European Union to stop championing the liberalization of water services in the General Agreement on Services at the World Trade Organization. We resolve to replicate and transfer our traditional knowledge and practices on the sustainable use of water to our children and future generations. We encourage the broader society to support and learn from our water management practices for the sake of the conservation of water all over the world. We call on the states to comply with their human rights obligations and commitments to legally binding international instruments to which they are signatories to, including but not limited to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Covenant on Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights, International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, as well as their obligations to conventions on the environment. We resolve to use all political, technical, and legal mechanisms on the domestic and international level so that the states, as well as transnational corporations and international financial institutions, will be held accountable for their actions or inactions that threaten the integrity of water. We call on the states to respect the spirit of Article 8J of the Convention on Biological Diversity as it relates to the conservation of traditional knowledge and conservation of ecosystems. We call upon the states to fulfill the mandates of the United Nations Framework's Convention on Climate Change and to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. We will ensure that international and domestic systems of restoration and compensation be put in place to restore the integrity of water and ecosystems. So to me, the obvious solution is to listen to these people who have successfully managed water on the land we currently stand on in the United States for thousands of years before we, as white people, arrived and fucked it all up in like 530 years.
Yeah.
So Kenna, what do you think about water?
Wow. It's like, in some ways it's like complicated, but in other ways I feel like it's really not. And it's like really the big looming thing is like just it needing to be a public service and a public good and, you know, not doing it the way that we're doing it, obviously. This kind of makes me think like, you know, a lot about like, I think why many like, you know, privileged people like, you know, like white people think that like climate change isn't going to be a problem. I can just move. I can just pay more for water. Like it doesn't affect me. And then you're like, wait, but it affects like everybody else, like who's not like as privileged as you are. Like, it's just like, and I'm like, eventually it will become your problem.
Yeah, it definitely will become all of our problems. I mean, it's already becoming all of our problems. Like we see entire communities that are going to be wiped out. And like obviously climate change disproportionately affects like poor people, low income people, and people of color. But that doesn't mean, yeah, like you said, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect everybody. Like it will affect everybody. Like the quality of life that we want, like it's not sustainable long term in a system of capitalism.
Yeah, and it's like people are just like a lot of, you know, especially like conservative people are just like, it just won't happen. And I'm like, you know, I feel like part of the conservative mind is like being focused on safety. But I think the safety portion has been, like, you know how we were talking about in our one episode about, like, we don't fear the things that we really should fear? Like, we're afraid of getting, like, murdered by serial killers when actually we're more likely to get murdered by somebody we know.
Right.
Or it's, like, we're more likely to, like, you know, people think that it's, like, you know, the safety is, like, through, you know, we get safety through military. We get safety through guns. It's, like, we get safety through having clean drinking water. Like, this is, like, actually really vitally important. And a lot of things too, I think, like, many people don't think about, you know, it being so urgent is because they're just like, well, everything's fucked anyway. It's like, it's nihilism from either being like, well, you know, nothing is sustainable anyway, like, fuck it. Or, like, in a more cynical view, like, many people are like, well, the world is gonna end, so it doesn't matter, like, what we do.
Right.
I mean, that's more like certain, like, what do you, like, Christian nationalist stuff, where it's just like, but I'm just like, well, you gotta live here anyway. You should do the best that you can right now.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's interesting to think of, because I feel like I never consider that people consciously are trying to, like, burn it all down because they actually don't think it matters.
Oh, I for sure think that that's, like, some people are, like, on the conservative side are literally like, well, like, the apocalypse is gonna happen. Like, we gotta speed it up here, people.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I usually just think of it like, oh, it's like greed. It's like capitalist greed, right? Where they're just like, well, I don't really care about that, and, like, maybe it won't happen, but, like, in the meantime, what will definitely happen is I'll get paid if I do this now.
Well, I think that people who are greedy also use this mindset of, like, apocalyptic thinking to their advantage. So it's like, I feel like there's a couple things going on. There's the fucking John Galt shit. There's the fucking Ayn Rand shit, where it's like, you know, being, you know, selfish is good. And you're like, no, being selfish is just being selfish and being a dick. Like,
Right. But that's, like, I think it's, like, hard because it's so, like, wrapped up into, like, the capitalist ideology. Like, when you, like, think about, like, even white people coming to the United States, right? And how they're like, yeah, we own this now. And people are like, what are you fucking talking about? You can't own this shit. Or, like, me as a kid being like, haha, that's so funny. Like, private companies could never own water. But it's like, no, private companies have owned water in the United States as long as the United States has existed. And there's just, like, certain ways of thinking that, like, don't occur to you unless they're, like, socialized into you. And it's like, how do we unsocialize the fucked up culture that, like, neoliberal capitalism has created in the United States? Like, I don't feel like people at their core want to be that selfish or that, like, if not selfish, like, that uncaring, I don't know, about issues like this. But it's just, like, not cool in certain social circles to care about the planet. And that's what it comes down to. It makes you look weak if you're conservative to care about the planet. Or, you know, it seems frivolous. And that's the stuff that, like, how do you fight that, I guess?
Yeah, or, you know, on the, you know, or, like, flipping out about someone using a straw. We keep going on the straw thing, you know?
Yes, the straws.
When it's like, no, but we need to be on the same page about the bigger picture of, like, water use, like, you know, public versus private ownership. And also, I think just, like, really creating a new, I don't know what you want to call it, a new culture, a new, like, vibiness of, like, certain things are just important. Like, clean water is important. People having access to clean drinking water is important. And we all are in, you know, it's like, besides just policies, we need a vibe shift.
Yeah, I think the vibe shift, I think maybe what we do is we just get gross about it. You know, like, gross and aggressive. Like, if someone's like, I don't give a fuck about the water, it's like, oh, my man wants to shit himself to death. Ha ha. High five, Greg. I think we gotta masculinize caring about the planet.
This is the only thing where I'm like, we need a new like, cool PR campaign.
We need a PR campaign to broify the environment so men think it's super masculine to care about it and want to protect it.
I think we need to just bimbofy the environment.
We have a two-pronged campaign. You can be in charge of the bimboification of environmentalism, and I'll be in charge of the broification.
I'm just gonna make it horny somehow.
Mine was gonna be horny too.
But I'm gonna make it horny. We'll come at it from many different ways.
Yes, bathroom humor, Beavis and Butthead, Do America, and horniness.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we need. We're going to vibe shift environmentalism.
I think that's it.
I think that's it. That's our episode on water.
Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to support us, we are also on Patreon at patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. And for $2 a month, you can access bonus content, bonus episodes. You can ask us questions, which we may or may not answer. But if you don't want to support us there, that is totally fine. We are just so happy that you're here.